Did you know you can master Unreal Engine 5 in no time? In just 3 hours, I'll take you from a complete beginner to an expert level. In this series, we'll start with the basics, such as installation and navigation, and progressively move to more advanced topics. By the end, you'll be able to create and optimize stunning scenes. Here's what you'll learn: setting up and navigating Unreal Engine 5, blocking out scenes, utilizing levels and Megascan libraries, exploring Nanite technology, scene optimization techniques, using pattern tools, creating landscapes and water features, 3D kitbashing, scattering props and color adjustments, foliage tools and decals, managing layers and lighting, sequencing and exporting your final movie. Let's get started and bring your ideas to life. Before we start, if you're interested in this content, give us a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and join our newsletter for exclusive educational tips and updates. Stay tuned for more exciting videos. Thank you for joining me in this lesson. Let's discuss the Epic game ecosystem, how to install Unreal Engine, and how to navigate its interface. If you are a complete beginner, this will be very exciting. Let's begin by heading to the Unreal Engine website and downloading the engine. This website is an excellent resource for learning about the engine's features and use in various industries. You can find detailed documentation about any tools available within the Unreal Engine. However, for now, we will focus on simply installing the engine. Feel free to explore the website later on at your own pace. To start installing Unreal Engine, go to the download section of the website and download the Epic Games Launcher. This launcher is your gateway to the Epic Games ecosystem, providing access to all Epic Games products, including Unreal Engine. Once you have downloaded, installed, and launched the Epic Launcher, you must create an account to sign in. Once logged in, navigate to the Unreal Engine section and click the Library tab. This is where you can download and install Unreal Engine. Click the plus icon next to the engine version to install the engine. A new one will pop up. From there, you can choose the version of Unreal Engine that you want to install. Once the installation is complete, you can launch Unreal Engine by clicking on the Launch button in the top right corner of the Epic Launcher. You can also set the default version of Unreal Engine to launch automatically. I have installed the latest Unreal Engine 5.4 version, so I don't need to install it again. However, if there's a new update available, I can easily update it through the Epic Launcher. While waiting for the download, let's explore the Epic Games Launcher's vast features. If you scroll down in the first section, you'll find My Project, showcasing all your ongoing projects. Anything saved on your computer will be displayed here for easy access. If you scroll down even more, you will find the Vault. The Vault is your storage of tools and resources. It contains all the items you've bought or received from the marketplace for free. Once added, these items become readily available for use in your projects. You can add any item directly from your Vault to a project. News tab. Let's explore other tabs at the top, such as the News tab. Here, you can stay informed with weekly updates, feature releases, and community showcases for Unreal Engine. You can get inspired and stay current with the latest developments and optimization insights. Samples tab. The Samples section in the launcher is a remarkable feature that showcases the engine's capabilities. It's beneficial for learning as you can download sample projects and examine them to understand how specific effects or features were achieved. In addition, you can use all of the materials and assets from the sample section for your projects. Remember that some files can be large, so ensure you have enough space on your computer and a good internet connection before downloading them. Marketplace. The Marketplace is the most crucial feature of the Epic Games Launcher. It's a fantastic tool for buying or selling your creations, including 3D assets, materials, and plugins. You can easily find what you need by browsing the numerous options, or searching by category or keywords. With plenty of assets and plugins to select from, the Marketplace is a powerful tool to have at your disposal. Free for the month. Many plugins and assets available in the Marketplace are permanently free. However, one section that I find interesting is the Free for the Month section. Every month, this section offers some high-quality assets that are usually paid for but are offered for free for a limited time. I always check out this section and add the free assets to my collection because you never know when you might need them later. Let's discuss how to choose an asset to buy. First, you must check if the asset is your supported engine version. Ensure that the asset you want to buy or add to your project is compatible with your engine version. However, there may be exceptions. For example, it should still work fine if you're using a 5.4 engine version and the asset is supported until 5.3. On the other hand, it's almost impossible to add a higher version asset to a project with a lower engine version. After purchasing something from the marketplace, it will be added to your Vault section, where you can access it later. Let's examine different kinds of assets that you have access to. I can categorize everything you buy from the marketplace into 3 categories. Firstly, you can easily buy assets like materials, 3D environment objects, other tools, and so on, and add them to your project. For example, here is a blueprint that helps take pictures. Secondly, you can install a plugin that performs a specific task on the engine, like this plugin that makes lighting strikes. Lastly, you might have an entire project that you need to create. For example, if you want to use any of these pieces of furniture in one of your projects, you need to create a project from this asset, go to that project, and then migrate that file to your project. Let's see how we can add something to a project. So you simply check the supported engine version and click Add to the project. It will show all the projects with the same engine version, so if you want to add it to another project with another engine version, just click on Show All Projects, and then you will see all your projects on your computer. If this sounds complicated or overwhelming, please don't worry. I just gave you some basic information about different types of assets. As we go through tutorials and training, you will gradually learn about various kinds of assets and how to manage them. The update I've made is finished, and I can now launch the engine from the top right corner button. Also, you can set the engine version you want to be the default, so that if you have multiple engine versions installed on your computer, that version launches every time you hit launch. You will also notice that there is a shortcut on my desktop. So, whenever I want to run Unreal Engine, I don't have to launch it from the Epic Games launcher. I can directly run it from my desktop, and it will open the version of the Unreal Engine that I set up in the Epic Games launcher. We are going to the Unreal Project browser right out of the bat. In the Unreal Project browser, you will see different tabs. The Recent Project tabs show all of the projects you are currently working on in Unreal Engine, and you can open the project you want directly from here. Also, if you want to see where a specific project is located on your computer, you can right-click and show it in Explorer. This will take you to the folder where the project is located. But let's talk about other tabs in the browser. We have Games, Film, Architecture, Automotive, and Simulation tabs. In each tab, you will see a template for a specific purpose. For example, if you want to make a third-person game, you will choose this template. Essentially, each template is a copy of the Unreal Engine with some of the settings already enabled and some assets added to the project. This gives you a jump start on the project. You don't have to activate all the settings related to that specific project manually. For example, if I want to make a third-person game, this template already has some assets and settings enabled for me. You can describe this template's operations and enabled settings here. You can also enable some other settings for yourself here. For example, you can choose between using Blueprint or C++ for your programming language. Blueprint is a programming language in Unreal Engine that doesn't require you to write code. Instead of writing code in a program like C++, you create your code using visual graphs. We can also enable some other settings here. For now, I will go to the Film, Video, and Live Events tab and choose a blank template to create an environment for cinematic perspectives. However, the process is the same if you want to make an environment for a game. Usually, it's a really good start if you start from blank, because later on, you can activate the settings that you want inside the project. Also, every project is a copy of the engine, so using a blank template for the project will reduce the size since we don't add unnecessary assets and settings to the project. In this section, we have 2 options available: Starter Content and Ray Tracing. The starter content is a valuable asset for beginners. It includes a collection of ready-to-use objects, materials, and some example environments that can help you start building scenes quickly. It's particularly useful if you're new to Unreal Engine and need assets to experiment with as you learn. On the other hand, ray tracing is an advanced lighting technology that simulates the real behavior of light in environments, providing more realistic shadows, reflections, and refractions. An RTX graphics card is highly recommended to effectively utilize ray tracing. These NVIDIA cards are specially designed with dedicated ray tracing cores that handle the demands of real-time, realistic lighting simulations, significantly enhancing your visual experience. While you can enable ray tracing on older GPUs, the performance may suffer and the results might not meet high-quality standards due to slower rendering and potential limitations in visual fidelity. For the purposes of this training, I will leave both options unchecked to start with a basic setup. This way, I can guide you step by step through enabling and utilizing these features effectively within Unreal Engine later in the course. For now, simply choose a name and location for your project and then proceed to create your project in UE5. This initial setup will help you understand the core functionalities before diving into more complex features. I'm going to call this project Chapter 1, and let's create it. Usually, when we start a new project or open a project for the first time on your computer, it takes a bit more time to start because the engine loads all of the assets and shaders that enable real-time rendering. So, don't worry if it seems like it's taking some time. Interface. So, let us start with the interface. We are inside of the Unreal Engine, and let's talk about the interface. At first glance, it seems very intimidating. There are so many buttons, options, and windows in this interface. Do we need to know everything about it? Absolutely not. We need just to know the options that we need. Even most professionals don't know all of the options and windows in this interface. They just know what they have to know. Let's just focus on the fundamentals. As you become more advanced, you will learn more about all of these windows and options located here. As you can see in this corner, we are in the Chapter 1 project we made. Also, here we see we are on a startup level called Main. I will discuss levels in detail later, but essentially, a level is a container that holds everything we put inside a scene, from objects to lighting, so it's going to hold our scene. Like any other software, a menu bar at the top is allocated to managing the software. Here, we see a file that controls managing the levels and the project we are working on, from saving to exporting and all other options. It's always good to know the shortcut for each of these items. For example, as we are going to build our scene inside Unreal Engine, we have to save our modifications within this level. So, Ctrl+S will save all of our modifications at our level. Throughout this training, we will save our changes again and again by holding the Ctrl and S buttons on the keyboard. Ctrl+Shift+S is going to save any changes that we made anywhere in the project, which is very handy as well. Also, under Edit, you will find all the usual editing options, including Copy, Paste, Duplicate, and Delete. The shortcuts for most of them are similar to those in other software, like Ctrl+C for copy, Ctrl+V for paste, and Ctrl+D for duplicate. So it's pretty similar to other software you are familiar with. Another tab here is Windows. If you are missing anything inside of the interface or want to access a missing window, you can activate or deactivate it here. For example, here I have my levels window. If I close it and come back here, I can bring it back from the window tab. We will use and discuss the rest of the tabs on the bar as we get more advanced. Another important window that we have to discuss here is the content drawer. As you can see, if you click on the left bottom part, you can access the content drawer. Also, because this is very useful and we will use it a lot, we can bring it back with Ctrl spacebar. What is the content drawer? The content drawer is going to be like our Explorer in Windows. It's going to show us all the content that we have inside the engine. By content, I mean all of the materials to the objects. Everything that we are bringing inside the Unreal Engine will be shown in our content drawer. Right now, we have two folders here, Content and Engine. The Content folder is for all of the 3D models and everything we will bring into the project. We are going to make our project in the Content folder. Right now, you see two files in my Content folder, which are related to what's called main level. Essentially, the main level that we are seeing in the viewport right now is an asset by itself inside my Content folder. Engine content is all of the behind-the-scenes content. The Engine folder contains all the default shapes, materials, and lighting related to how the engine runs. Since the content drawer is very useful and important, we can dock it to the layout. This means we will always have it shown here if we choose to. Also, we can move it and put it in another area of the screen, or even dock it to the sidebar and bring it from the side if we want to have it by our side. Let's just close it for now, and we can always bring it back from here. But let's go to the right side of the screen where we have multiple windows. The most important one here is the outliner. What is the outliner? Every actor that we put inside of the level is going to be shown here. What do I mean by actor? Everything inside the Unreal Engine is an actor, for example. From the object we put here to the light we put here. All of them are actors that we put inside a level. From now on, when I say actor, I mean any element that I'm moving around or bringing inside the level. The outliner is a place where we can control what is inside our level. I can control and select the items here and make them visible and invisible. I can also organize them. For example, I will select all of my lighting stuff items. Right-click, go to Move To, and create a new folder to organize them. Now I can turn on and off all of my lighting items. Also, if I hit F2, I can rename this folder. It is very important to keep your outliner clean and organized, because as this project progresses, you will get many items and actors inside of a level, and it will be very difficult to find them if you don't have a good organization here. So try to use a good organization system so you can be able to find your items here easily. Also, I can select some of the items and delete them if I don't need them. Another important tab here is Detail. If I select anything from the viewport or something from the outliner, I can get all of the properties related to that actor inside of the Detail section. For example, in the Transform section, I get the location, rotation, and scale information. Since I've picked the floor here, and it is a 3D mesh, the static mesh and material sections of its details will show me a mesh and a material applied to that mesh. As I said, everything inside a level is located somewhere in the content drawer. So, if I want to see where this floor is located inside my content drawer, there is an option here to browse and take me to where this floor is located inside the content browser. If I click this, you see that the floor is inside the folder inside the engine content in my content drawer. If you are new to 3D modeling and mesh and material seem strange, a mesh is essentially the skeleton or framework of a 3D object made up of vertices, edges, and faces that define its shape. Think of it like a wireframe model of something from the real world, such as a chair or a car. Now, to make this mesh look realistic, it needs a material. Materials are like the skin that wraps around the mesh. They can be shiny, matte, rough, or smooth, and give the object color and texture. Speaking of textures, these are detailed images or patterns that are applied to the material to give it more detail. For example, a texture might make a flat red material look like real brick or bumpy and irregular like an orange peel. Therefore, the relationship between a mesh, material, and textures is essential in building realistic 3D models. The mesh provides the form, materials give the mesh color and characteristics, and textures add the finer details. But let's go to other windows here. Levels that right now are going to control our levels and our sub-levels that I'm going to talk about in the next lesson, and world setting, which is going to give us a lot of control over the settings of the current level that we are working on. So, let's return here on the main level I showed you inside the content browser. If I want to find where it's located inside the content browser, I can simply hit this, and it will show me where it's located inside the content browser. As you can see, there is an asterisk on top of the level inside. Every time you see an asterisk inside Unreal Engine on top of something in the content browser, it means that you made some modification to that, and you have to save it. You can hit Ctrl+S, which will save every item that you made changes to and are currently selected in the browser, or in this case, you can right-click and save it from here. If you make changes to a level, you can save it from here as well. Right now, you see that we are in selection mode. We also have some other modes, and there are some shortcuts for them. If you go to landscape mode, foliage mode, or modeling mode, it will give you some other options related to that specific mode. For example, in modeling mode, You get many options for 3D modeling an object inside of the Unreal Engine, or in landscape mode, you will get some options around how to make a landscape for your scene or inside of your level. Let's go to selection mode. When building our scene, we are usually in selection mode. When we need other tools, we switch to different modes. Another useful button here is Quickly Add to Project, which provides a quick way to add actors to the scene. For example, if I need a simple cube, I come here to the shapes and I drag a cube into the scene. Also, I can type the actor that I'm looking for here and simply drag and drop it into the scene. You will become familiar with many other options as we progress through this training. Essentially, many items located inside Unreal Engine are accessible through other methods as well. But Quickly Add to Project is a way for us to quickly find the actor we are looking for and add it to the level. Before we jump to the main window in the middle, our viewport, let's also talk about some organizational techniques. Here, you can dock all of these to the sidebar and have them like this. Or let's bring them back. Also, you can, for example, stack one of them beneath another, or detach them completely and place them wherever you want. If something has disappeared, as I said in the Window tab, you can find it. For example, right now, I want to bring back my Levels and Details windows. Also, in the Windows panel, you can load or save a preferred layout. For example, some people are used to using the classic version of the interface, so it will be easier for them to work with Unreal Engine 4 as it used to be. Everything is integrated here. Another window, Place Actor, provides another way of accessing actors. However, since we have this option now, I don't necessarily use it. Let's go to the default layout. In the default layout, you see you have the outliner and details, which will be the two main windows we will use throughout this training. But right now, I want to put them side by side, and I'm going to bring back levels and the world setting that we had before and put them in the order we started with. Okay, let's jump to the main window, the biggest window here, our viewport. First of all, you see some weird shapes here in the middle. For example, this shape that if I go to my outliner, you see as my light source. Some actors, such as light sources, are initially invisible. Because light is initially invisible, Unreal Engine will give us a graphic representation of it so we can see where it is located inside the level and select it. If you press the G key while inside the viewport, it will toggle the game mode, which makes all of the helper graphics invisible. It will show a quick view of your final level without all those helpers. For example, you won't see the items related to lighting or even the grid on the ground when you hit G. Throughout this training, if you see these items appear and disappear, I'm hitting the G key as needed. Right now, I see that my scene is kind of empty. I want to make it fuller for the rest of this training. If I go to my content drawer, I see that I don't have anything in there to bring to the scene, so I want to add some starter content so I have something to work with. When the folder is selected, I can add a lot of actors to my folder from here. But I want to go to Add Features and Content Pack to the project. If I hit this, it's going to take me to Add Content to the project window. As you can see here, we have all the assets we could enable in the templates at the beginning of the project. We can bring them here to the project right now. At the beginning of the project, I said, okay, we don't want to bring this to the project because I want a blank project, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to activate them inside of the project. This is the place where you can add them. For example, I can bring third-person features again here that include all of the items you need to make a third-person game. Here in the content folder, I will choose the starter content. Starter content is a collection of assets in an Unreal project from static mesh props such as tables, chairs, doors, lamps, and materials like brick, wood, etc. It will give us a head start so we have something for the project. When I add this to the project, it will be added to my content folder. Inside my content folder, I have another folder, which contains numerous other items, including architectural elements and materials. I will now add a material to my floor by scrolling down, selecting it, and then dragging and dropping it onto the floor. Next, I'll add some walls with windows and doors from the architecture section. I click and drag these items into the scene, releasing them to place them. I'll also add a table from the prop section. Now, our scene is no longer empty, allowing us to discuss other items better. Look at the outliner. We've brought all these items to my level, and now they're visible there. I can select all these items. Right-click, choose Move To, and then organize them into a folder labeled Meshes. Another key feature is the ability to change the direction of light. By clicking anywhere inside my viewport and holding the Ctrl and L keys while moving the mouse, I can adjust the lighting direction, which is very handy. Now, let's explore what's going on inside the viewport. There are numerous options at the top left corner, but one of the most important is the Show Frames Per Second (FPS) setting in the viewport options. Enabling this shows how quickly Unreal Engine updates the scene in the top right corner. For context, movies typically shoot at 24 or 30 FPS, while some documentaries may exceed 60 FPS. Higher frame rates are common in games. Right now, it shows 120 FPS, which is reasonable given the simplicity of our current scene. Monitoring FPS is crucial as it helps determine if adding certain assets or effects might negatively impact performance, so you know in what step you made a mistake. Switching views is also useful. From the perspective view, you can switch to an orthographic view like top, bottom, or left views. One of the most useful features in orthographic views is the ability to use drag selection. This means that by clicking and dragging the mouse, a window will open and everything within that window or crossing it will be selected. This tool is not available in the perspective view and can greatly aid in the design process. I'm here to mention another important option. If you hold the middle mouse button and drag, you can measure your items in these orthographic views. Unreal Engine uses centimeters as the standard unit of measurement, so this is 410 centimeters. If you need to measure something, just hold your middle mouse button and drag to get the measurements. Let's switch to the perspective view. Remembering some of these shortcuts is also useful. If you look at view modes here, you see that we are currently in lit mode, which means that everything will be shown as it would appear in the final frame. There are other options like unlit that show just the albedo color of your items, which will be handy later in the process. You can also see our scene in wireframe mode, which is very useful for all of the meshes that make our scene. There are many other viewing modes that will be used in different cases. When you're in your orthographic views, you can switch to any other mode and change it from wireframe mode to any other viewing mode. All of these options are available in other views as well. Let's just go back to the perspective view mode. Let's explore items in the show icon here. You can manage some common features in the show menu, such as hiding certain items. This means that when you add a lot of actors to the level, sometimes you might want to hide some of them or even not see some of the features. For example, right now you see a grid on the ground. You can deactivate this grid here. Maybe there's a case where you don't want to see all of your meshes in the level, so you can come here and deactivate them from here so you no longer see any of your meshes. But let's bring them back, for now, both the grid and the static mesh. Let's go all the way here. Right now we have one viewport, but here you can access multiple viewports and all of these options in other viewports as well. You can also maximize any of these viewports as you work with them and make the same changes to those viewports. If I hold the right mouse button inside the viewport and move my mouse around, I can see what's happening within the scene. I can pan around the scene by holding the middle mouse button and moving the mouse. Scrolling in and out allows you to zoom in and out. Additionally, if I hold Alt with the right mouse button and move my mouse, I can zoom in and out. Holding Alt and the left mouse button lets me orbit around my scene. For those who are gamers, using the W, A, S and D keys while holding the right mouse button allows you to navigate the scene as if you were in a game environment. You can adjust the camera speed here. Increasing it will slow the movement and decreasing it will speed it up. If I select an object and press the F key, it will center that object in the viewport, allowing me to rotate around it. Another handy feature is setting bookmarks. If I find a view I like, I can bookmark it with Ctrl and a number key, like Ctrl+1. If I move elsewhere in the scene and want to return, pressing 1 will take me back to that bookmark. I can set multiple bookmarks this way, for instance, Ctrl+2 for a second view, and toggle between them using the 1 and 2 keys. If you ever feel disoriented in the scene, select an object and press F. This will focus the view on that object, which is a very useful technique. To deselect, simply click an empty space in the outliner. Now, let's discuss the options for select, move, rotate, and scale, which I can toggle between using the Q, W, E, and R keys. The selection mode is self-explanatory. You can use Ctrl to select items individually or in groups, and deselect with Ctrl+Shift. Moving on to move mode, which you can enter by pressing W or clicking here. When you select an item in move mode, a pivot will appear, showing the directions in which the object can move. You can move the object along the pivot's axis or between two axes simultaneously. For instance, I can move an object along the Y and Z axes. If I select the middle of the pivot, where three axes are connected, I can freely move the object in any direction based on the camera's view. However, you'll notice some snapping happening. We have a grid on the ground, and the pivot snaps to this grid as I move it around. You can toggle grid snapping on or off. Changing the grid size affects the snapping intensity. For example, making the grid larger results in larger snapping increments. Let's set it back to 10. If I disable snapping, the movement around the axis becomes much smoother and freer. Let's go to rotation. You can enter this mode by clicking on the rotation tool or pressing E on your keyboard. In this mode, you can rotate your object around its axis. However, you'll notice there's a snapping effect in action. If you prefer, you can adjust or disable the snapping under the rotation settings. It is currently set to snap every 10 degrees. Let's disable it for now. One interesting feature to mention: if you want to move your objects more freely, go to Edit and Preferences, and in the window that opens, type Arc Ball. Enable this setting, and you can rotate your objects without considering the axes by clicking and dragging them in the middle of the pivot. As you change the rotation, you'll notice the rotation parameters updating in real time under the Details panel. If you ever need to reset the rotation to its original state, click the Reset button next to the rotation parameter. This reset will return the object to its original orientation. Similarly, you can use the Location Reset option to reset an object's location to the center of the scene. Now, let's discuss scaling. You can enter scale mode by clicking on the Scale tool or pressing R. Here, you can scale your object along any axis. If you grab the middle of the scale pivot, you can scale the object uniformly. To demonstrate, I'll reset the scale so that any adjustments from now will start from the default scaling. Notice the lock button next to the scaling options. If engaged, it will maintain uniform scaling automatically. However, like rotation and movement, scaling also has a snapping option set to 25% increments by default. You can disable this if you need finer control over the scaling process. Now that we know all about move, rotate, and scale, let's make some walls. As I move around my scene to position these walls, please note that if you want to stack objects precisely on each other, pressing the End key will align them perfectly. To duplicate an object, simply press the Ctrl+D key. Initially, it might appear that nothing happened, because the duplicate is precisely over the original. If you move the new object, you'll see the duplication. Also, if you hold Alt while moving an object with the pivot, Unreal Engine will automatically create and place a duplicate of that object. Suppose you want multiple objects to share the same rotation or other properties. You can copy the properties from one object and paste them onto another using the Details panel. This ensures consistency across similar objects in your scene. For instance, if you want two cubes to have identical properties, copy all relevant attributes from one and paste them into the other. You can select multiple items within one category, such as scale, and when multiple items are selected, you might see different values for each. However, you can type a number to uniformly control all of them on that specific parameter. Let me move this a bit to the side. Another option I haven't yet discussed is snapping to the surface. If I want to add a chair to the scene, I go to the prop section, select a chair, and place it using its pivot point. But if I activate surface snapping and then place it, it will align with the surface I'm dragging it to. Remember to disable this feature when you're done, as it can interfere with using the pivot in other situations. Let's talk about the world and local setting. Currently, you see that I can move objects along the global axis. But if I change the setting to local, the object will move along its own axis. This also applies to rotation. You can see how the behavior changes when I adjust this setting. Let's move this object over here. Now, I believe we've covered all the essential tools. Remember, when you add something to the outliner, always move it to the specific folder you need to keep it organized. I hope you're enjoying this lesson. We've covered foundational topics like the Epic Games ecosystem, installing Unreal Engine, and using its features. Don't forget to explore the Epic Games website and documentation. Next, we'll look at the concept of levels in Unreal Engine. During our previous lesson, we made some modifications to our level that resulted in asterisks appearing in different places on the screen. These asterisks indicate that changes have been made and need to be saved. To save the changes, I simply pressed Ctrl+S. In the last lesson, we covered the creation of a simple scene to explore different items, interfaces, and navigation systems available to us. In this lesson, we'll start working on our own project by creating our working level. As I said, we are currently on a level called Main, which is located in our content folder, and I also must say that is our startup level. Essentially, a startup level is the level that will be shown to us when we open a project. We can change the startup level by going to Settings, Project Settings, Maps, and Modes. Right now, you see that the editor's startup map is set to the main level map. Levels and maps will be used interchangeably in Unreal Engine. A rule of thumb is that you should never build your project on a startup map, because you will be bringing in many assets and changing many settings while you are making it. There may be problems during the process, and it will be very hard to open your level if a bug occurs. So, don't build your project on the editor's startup map. However, you can change it later on when you finish the project. If you want to see where your startup level is located, you can do so by clicking here. You can also change your startup level here. But for now, we are going to build our project on a brand new level. Let's talk a little about what are levels. In simple terms, levels in Unreal Engine are like different rooms or areas in a house. Each level holds all the stuff needed for that specific part of a game or virtual world, like objects, scenery, and actions. They help developers organize their work and make it easier to build big projects. So let's create one. I go to the content drawer and create a folder called Levels inside my content folder. It's very important to keep your content organized, just as you keep the outliner organized, because it will be very hard to find your items if you don't have a good organization system for your project. To make a new level, you can go here and right-click to create a new level from here. However, there is another way to create a level. You can go to the File menu and create a new level. I want to create a level from here because I want to show some templates that we have for levels. If I open it from here, you'll see 4 templates you can use to create your level. If you were to make it by right-clicking in the content drawer, it would automatically go to an empty level. On the left-hand side of your screen, you'll find 2 options to open the world in Unreal Engine. 2 of them is the Open World option, which sets in motion the world partition function that separates the level into partitions. This feature is particularly useful when creating an open world game, since it enables different parts of the level to be loaded into the engine as players move around. However, using the word partition function means that you can't use sub-levels, another great feature in Unreal Engine. So, if you're not making an open world game, you don't need to use the open world templates available here. The difference between a basic and an empty level is that in a basic level, they've already put some lighting in the basic version, so you have a jump start. But I don't need them at this point. Let's just start with an empty level, and I'm going to build the scene myself and even add the lights myself as well. So let's create a level. As you can see right now, the scene is empty and the outliner is also empty. Before we start, you see that the level is named Untitled because we still need to save it. We can save it from here or hit Ctrl+S. And as we do that, it'll ask us where we want to create that level. I go to the folder that I chose here and I'm going to pick a name for it. Naming conventions in Unreal Engine are very important. For every item I start right now, I want to make a level. So I start with a capital L and underscore, and I'm going to write the name I want to put for this level. I'm going to call it Abandoned. So let's call it L_abandoned_version 01 to show it is the first version of our level. As we go through the training, we are going to save multiple versions at each step, because in some cases you made a mistake and want to go back to the level version before that. So it's very important that you have multiple versions. Let's create the level. Now if you go to your content folder and inside the level folder, you see the level that you made. Again, you could create the level by right-clicking and creating it from here as well, but right now I don't need it. I wanted to show you the other way that was possible as well, because I wanted to show you the template levels that were available. So inside of our scene now, we don't have anything and the outliner is empty. Let's bring some lighting into the scene. I go to Window and select Environment Light Mixer. Inside the Environment Light Mixer, you can create any of these lights by clicking and creating all of them. This will create a simple dynamic lighting system. I will discuss these lights in detail, but they involve directional light, which represents the sun or the moon, as well as the atmosphere and clouds. Remember that when you start making stuff in Unreal Engine, just select all of them, right-click, and move them to a folder, so you can start having a good organization system in Outliner. I will call it Lighting, so all of my lighting now is inside this folder. In later lessons, I will start blocking out my scenes with some basic shapes. If I go to Quickly Add to Project in Shapes, I can bring all the shapes I need, from cubes to spheres to cylinders to cones. Remember to have an organization system. You can just move them, and since I will put them in one folder, I will call it Blocking. One point to consider is that the location of lighting items doesn't affect the scene. These are just representations of items inside the scene, so you can move them wherever you choose. I want to start building out my scene. I want to start with blocking, but before that, I want to introduce sub-levels. We talked about making levels, but what are sub-levels? If levels are the containers that hold everything we put inside the scenes, sub-levels are like containers within those containers. For example, imagine you want 2 sets of lighting, one for night and one for day. You might think, okay, I'm going to put them in different folders. But as you get more advanced, this approach won't work, because for instance, if you want to make an animation out of it, then you cannot hide one set with hiding the folder. Also, we are building our scene with blocking. This information is useful only for the first stage of our project, but it won't be needed later, so I'll put my lighting on one sublevel and my blocking on another. I go down to my content drawer, and inside my levels folder, I make another folder, which I'm going to call SL, which stands for sublevels. I'm going to create 3 sublevels. For example, for daylighting, I'll use SL_daylighting. Then I'll make another for night lighting, SL_nightlight, and another one for blocking, SL_blocking. As you can see, all of them have an asterisk, which means they need to be saved. I hit Ctrl+S to save all of them. Then I went to my levels window, and you see other than the persistent level, which is the main level, we don't have any sub-levels. I can just drag and drop them here from the content browser. So every other level will be a sub-level of this level. I also have to select all of these. Right-click and change the streaming mode from blueprint to always loaded. The reason for always loaded is that it binds these together instead of the blueprint, which means you have to trigger it from inside to get this level loaded. The blueprint feature is useful for games. It allows you to save a specific set of environmental or lighting settings within the game. You can then load these settings using a command you create within the blueprint. For example, you could press a button to load the settings. However, using the always loaded option will cause these settings to be permanently linked together. When blocking is selected, I will select all of my items here, right-click, and move selected actors to this level. I can do the same thing for my lighting. I can select all of my lighting in the outliner, come back to the daylighting inside the level window, and move selected lighting to this level. As you see, I have a level for lighting and another for blocking. Let's select the night lighting. When it is selected and active, everything I create goes to this level. I will turn off my daylighting, and from the Windows menu, I select the environment light mixer again and another set of lighting. One important point here is that if I hold Ctrl+L, click anywhere inside the viewport and start moving my mouse, I can change the direction of the light to create a night setting. You see, you can move around the sun and, for example, get some sort of night or sunset look. Now I can toggle between my daylighting and night lighting, but I don't want both of them to be activated because I have multiple directional lights in my scene. And you see that there are asterisks in front of all of them, so I go to the File menu, I see a Ctrl+Shift+S, which will save everything. So I hit Ctrl+Shift+S to save everything. Please note, if I select the main level right now and make a copy of the cube by holding Alt and moving the cube with the help of the pivot that you see, the copy will not be in the blocking level because it is not active, but will be part of the active level. So, to make a copy, always stay on the same level. You have to come to the block, select the blocking level, and then make your copy while you are at that specific level. Now as you can see, it will be activated at the same sublevel. In the lesson on Unreal Engine, we covered creating and managing levels, including startup levels, organizing content, creating new levels, sublevels, and dynamic lighting setup. Next, we'll focus on building scenes, starting with basic shapes and structures and expanding into detailed environments. In this lesson, I will use basic shapes to create a rough scene outline. I will also use a third-person character, and I will explain a little about the camera. I have already looked at some concept ideas and have been inspired to create my own scene. A useful tool that I use to organize my reference images is PureRef. You can get this app for free, and it will be very handy since you can see all of your references on one board. So generally, I decided to make an abandoned complex near the lake. I have some ideas about what to make, and I'll start blocking it out. Here is a look at the final result, so we will be on the same page. Let's begin. Inside the levels, make sure that the blocking sublevel is selected. I will now use all of these basic shapes inside this sublevel to lay out my scene. On the other hand, I don't need to set up lighting now. In the lighting section, I will use the night light sublevel to have another lighting set, but for now, I'm going to delete it from here. Please note that even if I delete it from here, it will already be in our content folder, so we can return it at any point. This is the advantage of having a sublevel rather than just a folder. Let's hit Ctrl+Shift+S on the keyboard to save all of them, come back, and start laying out our scene. Now that I want to start blocking out my scene, I need human scale as a reference. The unit in the engine is centimeters. So, if my grid is 10 by 10, every square is 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. I can change the grid size as well, but if I look at my cube is around 100 centimeters by 100 centimeters, so 1 meter by 1 meter, you can block out your scene by understanding the proportion like that and scale it accordingly. However, it will be much easier to have a human figure as a scale here to give us some perspective. I will bring another set of assets inside the content drawer for my project. I go to Add Feature or Content Pack and add other tools I need for my project. I'm thinking about the third-person content here because in this third-person content I can get a human figure character, so I can use it as my scale. Let me add it to my project. When I add it to my project, the content browser pops up and we have new items. But let me just close this and come back to my content drawer. If I close everything here and go to the content drawer, I see that I have 3 new folders, each containing all the assets that I need to make a third-person game. We will introduce some of the items in these 3 folders later, but let's just stick to what we need for now. You can explore them later to see what else is going on. Under Character and Mannequins and Meshes, you'll find some human figures, which we can use as our scale. Okay, I will drag this one into the scene to be my human scale for building out my project. Just hit OK, it doesn't matter. Essentially, since we are putting this new actor in an empty place inside the level, it is giving me this warning. I currently have the figure inside my blocking sublevel, but I need it moved to my main level since I am going to use it later, even after blocking, to check my scene and see how it looks from a human scale point of view. So, I will select the figure and move it to the main level. However, now I'm going to start blocking out my scene. When you want to block out your scene, ensure you are in the blocking sublevel. Let's start blocking out our scene. At this stage, it will be pretty easy. I will use these basic shapes to build 3 buildings near a lake. I'll just block out my scene accordingly. While working on my scene, I use the copying and pasting technique to move around objects. To make it easier, I also utilize the snapping tool for better rotation. It's just copying and pasting. There's nothing special about it. I'm just trying to come up with an interesting perspective from this point. Also, I will utilize the top view when I'm in wireframe mode to adjust my work. You'll notice that I can scale pretty much in any other mode as well. Once we have a rough idea of our design, it is crucial to establish our views. Since we are creating this for cinematic purposes, having a specific view that we want to work on is essential. It is much easier to establish this from the beginning rather than later on. If we intend to create a game, setting a view is not essential. Now that we are going to develop a view, there are several options that we can consider. First, you can select a useful view, and then, with Ctrl+1, you can bookmark it so that every time you go around, you hit 1 on your keyboard to return to your view. This is the basic way of doing it, and it's very fast in the sense that you can just hit 1 on your keyboard and return to this. You can also have multiple views, so hit Ctrl+2 on the keyboard to create another bookmark. If I hit 1 or 2, I'll jump between these 2 views. Since we are making this for cinematic purposes, it might be a good idea to put a camera in it to establish the kind of shot we want. First of all, make sure that you go to the main level. We don't want to put your camera on the blocking level because even after blocking, we will use the camera. From the viewport options, you can create a camera. Make a cinematic camera. And if you create it right now, it will create a camera with the exact view you are looking at. If I go to the outliner, when the camera is selected, you see it in the viewport. If I deselect it by just clicking on anything else, it won't be shown anymore. You can pin the view and the camera here, and then when you are working on other things, you can see how it looks inside your camera. This is very useful, especially when establishing a scene according to your view. If you right-click on the camera and pilot it, you can see through its lens and move it to another location. When you exit the camera here, you will be in the same location on the viewport. Another practice you can have is to keep working on your scene, and when you want to see what's going on in the camera, you come back here, right-click and pilot the camera, and see what's going on in the view. Let's talk about some of the options we have in the camera. When the camera is selected, I see many options when I go to the detail window. If you are familiar with any digital camera, it's very easy to navigate. First, one of the important ones is a film back, which shows the camera's sensor. If you want something similar to a digital camera, putting it on a DSLR is better. This setting will change the sensor size, similar to a DSLR camera. Also, all the way down here, you see that the current focal length is kind of crazy because it took it from the viewport we were working on. However, you can change it to whatever you think looks good. Another important setting is the focus setting. This is an eyedropper. You can select something from the scene and it'll automatically set the focus distance. You can also move this number manually to correct it. However, the Draw Debug Focus Plan option will help you see where exactly the focus plane, which is very useful. There are so many other options that we can discuss when we put your camera. However, since this is an environment design lesson, we will skip over it, and I will explain it in more detail in other courses. So for now, let's just delete the camera and go back to our bookmark. As you can see right now, because we changed the focal length in the camera, we now have another focal length here for our viewport. We can set it back to default by changing the field of view in our viewport option to 90. I will now create a camera from my view with the default settings. I will not change any settings on the camera at this point, but I wanted to show you the options so you can change them if you like. We are currently developing a game engine, which we can use to play this level of the game. We already have a character in the level, and if you're wondering how we can control this character, I will explain how. We added a third-person character to our project and brought it to our level. Now, we want to see how we can play the level like a game and gain inspiration as we walk around the scene. When we added the character, we imported 3 folders into the content folder. In the third-person folders, there is a BP_ third-person game mode blueprint that will help us play our character at this level as a third-person game. Blueprints in Unreal Engine are a powerful visual scripting system that allows you to create game logic without writing code. They enable you to design gameplay mechanics, character behaviors, and interactions within the game environment visually. For our third-person character, the blueprint includes all the logic to control the character, handle animations, and respond to player input. Now, let's look at how we set up our character using blueprints. I go to the World Settings window, and you can see that right now, nothing is assigned to the game mode override. This means we don't have a playable character or game logic assigned to this level. To resolve this, we must specify the game mode that includes our character blueprint. I can click on None to see all the items that we can assign to this parameter, which are inside our project. Also, you can search for the item that you are looking to assign here. In this case, we want to select BP_ third-person game mode here. You have to note that all of the items that had been showing for use to select are sitting somewhere in our content folder, so I can put it back to None. Go to the content folder, select the third-person game mode blueprint, and then assign it to the game mode override by clicking on the arrow sign here. By the way, selecting an item in the content folder and assigning it to a parameter by clicking on the Assign button is a very handy tool that you will use frequently later on. So now that it is assigned, if I hit play form here, the level will go to game mode and I will play a version of our character in this environment like a game. You might ask why this was a female character when the original one was a male, so how can we change it? To exit the game, I just press Escape key on the keyboard. I double-click on the blueprint to be able to edit it in this window. Inside the blueprint, we see what controls this character. The blueprint consists of the code that enables us to control the character. So, when I go to the viewport, I can see that there is currently a female character here that we can use to play the game. If I want to change the body of our character, in the detail window under Mesh, I can see that it is assigned to a female character. If I click here, I can find where this character is located. As you see, it is in another folder of my content that I brought in with a third-person character. So instead of this female, I'm going to select skm_Manny_simple, which will be male. So when it's selected, I can just come here and assign it to this. And now you see that we have a male character here. since we made some changes in the blueprint. I will compile my file. Compiling means rewriting the code so that this blueprint runs smoothly. When I compile, I also save it, since we have to save any changes to any asset. So now if I close this and play the game again, you see that I'm playing this game with a male character. Let's hit Escape key on the keyboard to exit the game. You notice that when you hit the play button, it will start the game from the location of the camera. So if I am somewhere that it is out here and I play this game, you see, because we didn't have any background, it's going to fall down. So let's return, hit Escape key and return to our bookmark. I'm going to add a player starter to my scene. This actor will indicate where I'm going to spawn the player when I start the game, so we don't have that problem again. So now wherever I am in the scene, it doesn't matter anymore because when I hit the play button, it will start the game from the location of the player starter. Please note, if you need your mouse cursor when you are in game mode, you can hit Shift plus F1. If you hit it inside the viewport, it will disappear again. If you hit the Shift plus F1 button, you can exit the game. Let's go back to our bookmark. In the outliner, I have these 3 items that are my helpers, and I will put them in a folder and call them helpers. Also, if you want to expand all of the folders in the outliner, you can do it from here, and you can collapse your item from here as well. Now that we've established a scene, I will keep working on my blocking. Thank you for participating in this lesson on blocking out a scene and using basic shapes to create a rough layout. We also discussed the use of a third-person character for scale reference and essential camera functionalities. By now, you should understand how to set up a basic scene, organize your content, and establish a camera view for cinematic purposes. In the next lesson, we'll build on this foundation by adding more details to our scene, refining our layout, and introducing advanced techniques to enhance our environment. Remember, mastering Unreal Engine requires practice and experimentation. Welcome back to this lesson on transitioning from blocking to building our environment in Unreal Engine. Now that we've completed our initial blocking, it's time to enhance our project by integrating detailed assets and materials. I will build my environment on the main level, which we currently call L Abandoned, so be sure to come here and select the persistent level. Also, let's press Ctrl plus Shift plus S to save everything we did on the other levels. I will save the current level as another version, so we can revisit it later in our project. This is perfect practice since you have a history of progress in your project, and at any point, you can use previous versions to take the project in another direction. Also, you might make mistakes, and having a backup is always a good idea. One of our most valuable resources is the Quixel Megascans library, which offers high-quality 3D assets. In this lesson, I'll guide you through accessing, downloading, and integrating these assets into our project. We will also discuss master material instances and LODs. Let's use these powerful tools to take our project to the next level. To access the Quixel Megascan library, click Quick Add and open Quixel Bridge. It will open the Quixel Bridge and connect you to the Quixel Megascan library. First, log into the Quixel Megascan library with your Epic Games account to use all the assets here. On the browser, you can type the type of assets you need. This library is a combination of materials, 3D objects, and many useful assets that we will all use to build our scenes. For example, we have 3D assets here that have been scanned and are of really high quality, which we can use. Also, they have 3D plants, including lots of vegetation and plants we use for our creations. We have surfaces that include all the materials and textures we can use for our project. All the way down, we have decals. Decals are another material, but they provide additional details we can project onto an object. I will explain decals in more detail in later lessons. We also have imperfections, some of which we can use in our materials. You can go through these selections and find what you need. One helpful feature is the collection. They categorize assets according to a category. They put all the materials and objects related to one scenario in one collection. For example, in Junkyard Volume 1, you see all of the 3D assets and materials related to making a junkyard. It is beneficial because you can find a collection close to what you are looking for and select the items related to that collection from there. We also have metahumans, digital humans that we can use in our projects. If you go all the way down to local, you will see all of the items currently downloaded from various projects. If I want to see where an object is on my computer, I can right-click on it and go to File, which will show me where it is. You can also delete them if they take up too much space or you don't need them anymore. Once you have downloaded them, adding them to your project is much faster. You also have a Favorites section. Right now, I don't have anything in my favorites, but I work by browsing through the library and adding items I like to my favorites. Then, I decide whether to download them for my project. If I add this material to my favorites, it will be shown in my favorites. Let's examine some of the items inside the Quixel Bridge library. Let's go to the surfaces and see all the materials and textures available. Let's go to the tile section, and you see all the tiles available here. Let's take a look at this tile over here. As I said, even for the tile, you can add it to your favorites or download it by clicking this button. Let's take a look at what we see here. You see some renderings of the tile and how it looks when you put it in different scales in your environment. You can add it to your favorites here as well. If I click on these three dots, there is an option that gives you an asset ID. The asset ID is a number that can help you, especially if you want to collaborate on this project with others. I will share with you all the asset IDs for the assets and materials I use throughout this tutorial. If I copy this asset ID and paste it into the search, you see a combination of letters and numbers. If I search it, you see that it shows me the exact material we are looking at. Down here, you see the size of the material, some helpful information about its tags, and other related materials. You will also see some downloading options. You can download it in low, medium, high, or highest quality. The difference is the resolution of the texture on these materials. It starts from 1K and goes all the way to 8K. We don't need more than high quality 4K resolution. For some assets that are far away, you can use medium or low quality, because we need to be careful about the performance of our project. If I select any of these options, it will be my download quality. I can hit the download button here or from the top. Let's hit the download button and download this asset to our computer. Now that we have our assets on our computer, we need to add them to our project so that we can see them in our content folder. Let's add it to the project. As you can see, our content browser just popped up and we see a few more folders inside our content browser. However, let's keep it for now and I will explore it later. Let's examine a 3D file inside the collection. I will go to Environment and Urban and Neo-Baroque Volume 2. You see all of the items related to building an environment on a Neo-Baroque genre scene. You even have some renderings that showcase what you can do with the collection. But let's go back to this asset. As before, you can add it to your favorites or copy the asset IDs. I will provide below in the tutorial description for all of the asset IDs I use and show you. Another important thing is the size. Here, a human scale will be significant because that simple presentation shows you how big an object is. For example, it doesn't make that much difference because it's a window, and you always know how big a window can be. But when talking about a mountain or a piece of rock, you need to know if it is the size of a building or a shoe. So, this size indication will help you understand how big a 3D item is inside the library. The open and closed status shows us whether this is a one-sided object. It means that it is built to be good on one side and not built for the other side. I will show you what this means inside the engine. Most of the 3D assets inside this library are 3D scans from natural environments. If you think about 3D scanning a wall, you understand that they just 3D scanned the exterior of the wall, not the interior. That's why it says it is open. If it were closed, it would mean that they scanned around the object. This usually applies to some rocks and prop objects that can be scanned all around, not a piece of building like this. You can also see the related assets here. Let's go to download quality. We have low, medium, high, and nanite quality. Low, medium, and high quality indicate the texture resolution again, not the resolution of the object itself, or in other words, the number of its polygons. It's just how big the texture resolution is going to be. If you are new to 3D, I must explain that a 3D object is a digital model representing a physical item in three-dimensional space made up of vertices, edges, and faces, which we call a 3D mesh. Examples include characters, vehicles, and buildings. Material textures are images applied to these 3D objects to give them visual details like color, patterns, and surface properties like roughness and shininess. They create realistic and detailed models in video games, simulations, and animations. In this case, we have the 3D wall here and its texture and material. Low, medium, and high quality don't affect the 3D model. However, they do affect the resolution of the texture assigned to it. Nanite quality is completely another ballgame, and I'll explain it in more detail in the next lesson. For now, let's download it in high quality. We can also add it to our scene. When we add it to our project, you see there are more items inside the folder. Now that we have some items from the Quixel Megascan library in our project, it makes more sense to examine them before we use them. Let's go to the content drawer. If I go to the content drawer, you will see two more folders inside my content drawer, Megascans and MS Presets. These two folders will be the assets I brought into Unreal Engine. Megascans will show me the assets, and MS Presets is behind the scenes, making these assets what they are. Let me explain. For example, I have a folder for surfaces, which contains my materials. Inside this folder, there is a material instance and 3 textures. In Unreal Engine 5, a master material is a template that defines the core properties and behaviors of a material by using texture images that provide visual details such as color, roughness, and surface patterns. Material instances are created from this master material, allowing for the efficient creation of multiple variations by adjusting exposed parameters without duplicating the base data. In this case, you can see the material instance of our tile material and its textures inside this folder. To find its master material, you have to go to the MS Preset folder that was created when we brought our asset into Unreal Engine. Let's start by examining the material instance. If I double-click on it, I'm going to jump into the material instance editor. I'm going to make this bigger. We have a viewport that will be exactly like the viewport we had inside Unreal Engine, so the navigation will be similar to what we had. So the navigation is simple, and all items here will be the same as before. However, in the Show option, you can deactivate the background if you don't want to be disturbed by it. Other items are similar, so we can go around the preview mesh that our material is applied to and see it from different points of view. Also, from here, I can change the preview mesh for the object that is here. The last option requires you to have a mesh selected in the content browser. For example, if I select this static mesh and then come back and select this option, you will see that the material is applied to the mesh I selected from the content browser. It is a very good example of testing material on an object inside your content browser. The cube is good for now. In the details section, you will see some parameters we can change for this material. Before we delve into the details of the items, let's first understand how physically based rendering, PBR materials in Unreal Engine, help create realistic 3D objects by simulating how light interacts with different surfaces. These materials use various textures, including base color or albedo texture, which provides the primary color of the surface, like the paint on a wall or the fabric color of a couch. Metallic texture, which tells the material which parts should look like metal. Metal parts will reflect light more and look shiny. Roughness texture that controls how smooth or rough the surface is. A low roughness value makes the surface shiny, like glass, while a high roughness value makes it look dull, like chalk. Normal map texture that adds fine details to the surface, like small bumps or grooves, without increasing the complexity of the model. It makes flat surfaces look more detailed and realistic. Ambient occlusion texture, which adds shadows in small creases and corners where light would naturally be blocked. It makes objects look more three-dimensional. Now that we have a good understanding of how it works, let's examine the most important options here. The global section provides access to the tiling. You can adjust the tiling and even offset the material's texture. You can also rotate it. You can hit it from here if you want to reset the changes. However, resetting this one from here will be a problem, because it will set the tiling to 0, which doesn't make sense. So, if you want to reset it from here. If you don't see it activated in real time, it's because of a bug. Just try to activate and deactivate it. The bug will disappear and work. It's a bug in this engine version, and hopefully they will fix it. If you don't need to change this, let's just deactivate it. These items in the albedo section give you control over the texture we use to show the color of the material. For example, you can change the tint or adjust the texture's saturation, brightness, and contrast. Again, let's just reset them. Let's skip metallic and specular because they are less common now. Let's go to the roughness. To show roughness better, I think the sphere is much better. If you see some noise inside this viewport, it is a glitch inside the engine, and hopefully they will fix it in later releases. If I decrease the maximum roughness, you see it getting much softer and shinier. At the same time, if I increase the roughness, it becomes much rougher. So, for minimum and maximum roughness, you have some control over how shiny your object can be. Later, we see the black and white texture that controls roughness in this material over different areas, and essentially, these parameters control the impact of that texture. Another important thing here is normal, which uses another texture to determine how bumpy our material is in different areas. By adjusting its number, we control its impact. For example, I can increase it to make it bumpier. I believe the cube is a much better option for examining the normal. Normal will show you how rough and bumpy an object can be. Increasing it makes it much higher, and decreasing it below 1 down to 0 makes it much softer and less bumpy. However, you can go all the way to minus, which means that it will reverse the bump. It means the places that went down will go up, and up will go down. So, decreasing it from 1 and 0 makes it less bumpy, but if you go to minus, it essentially changes the bump's direction. Let's go to texture maps. So here it's going to show you what textures they are using. If I want to see where the texture is located, I click here. I see that it's inside the folder they created for me. So, right now, I have 3 textures inside the folder. I'm going to open them one by one and see what the differences are between them. The first one is the albedo. The albedo is the color of your material. You can also change the brightness, saturation, and other things in the detail section. However, it's not recommended here since our material has a good structure that we can use to make necessary change inside of our material. The other one is the normal map, which shows us the bump in the texture. The last one is a weird one that has multiple colors. For this material, they use a technique called channel packing. You know that every digital image, it is made as RGB channels, and each channel is a black and white images that hold information regarding of that channel. In our case, they put grayscale image on each channel that controls roughness and other parameters, and then pack it as one so they save on a number of textures that we need to ship out for each material. This technique is called channel packing. So let's return to my texture and material. The last one that I want to see is the parent, which is the master material that this material is connected to. So if I locate it, it will be in the MS presets. This is the master material behind the material instance we are using. So essentially, if I open it and opens this node as well, I see many calculations that enable us to use the material instance easily. In one of my later courses, we will discuss how to make one for ourselves. It isn't as complicated as it seems, but the only thing you should know is that there is logic behind a material instance, so we can quickly move a number and get different results. Now that we know how a material instance works, if I close it, go to my surface, right-click on it, and see my references, it shows the relationship between the material and the material instance. Okay, let's return to our project and open the 3D Assets folder that we brought in from Quixel Megascan library. It is inside the Megascan folder and in the 3D Assets folder. Inside this folder, I have a material instance and textures, but I also have a static mesh. Oh, what is a static mesh? Let me open the static mesh. If I go to this static mesh, we will see that the viewport is precisely the same as the viewport we had for Unreal Engine, so we can move around it like we used to. If you look at the right side in the details, you will see that our material is assigned to this static mesh. This is our static mesh. It is a 3D object with material applied to it. We previously discussed meshes when talking about 3D objects. Essentially, a static mesh is the same concept, and the term static means that it doesn't change or move, in contrast to something like a character that moves. But let's come back to the static mesh. When we turn around, you see that the backside of this static mesh will not be shown. It also means it's not going to cast shadows as well. In Unreal Engine, the backside of meshes, backfaces, are not shown by default due to a technique called backface culling, which improves performance by not rendering polygons facing away from the camera. This optimization reduces the number of polygons the engine needs to process, speeding up rendering. For most objects, like buildings or trees, only the front faces are visible and rendered. If both sides of a surface need to be visible, such as with a flag or leaf, a two-sided material can be enabled in the material editor, allowing both the front and back of the surface to be rendered, but I don't recommend it because it's not performance friendly. If you go to the wireframe, you see that this static mesh is not closed, it's just one side. Also, if I come here, I will see something else called LODs, or level of detail. If I change the LODs, I don't see much of a difference in this case. But if I go to wireframe mode, I will be shocked by how much of a difference there is in the details. Essentially, each LOD is a version of the mesh made with fewer faces. So, whenever we use an LOD solution, as we get close to it, it will use an LOD with more details. If we go far from it, it will use something that has fewer polygons, which is very performance friendly when making a game. For example, when your player is far away from an object, the engine is going to use an LOD that has much less information, and as we get closer to that object, it is going to use other LODs. To bring these concepts home, let's bring another 3D asset from Quixel Bridge. I selected an assembly, which is made up of multiple 3D objects. One additional point is that when you want to import an asset into your scene, you don't have to wait for it to be downloaded, you can simply drag and drop it, creating a preview to start working on your scene. Once the download is complete, the engine will replace the preview with the original file. The only difference is that you will also have a preview file in the folder. Now, let's focus on the mesh. It appears to be semi-closed, and if you go inside, you'll notice that the backside is not visible as well. When it comes to the LODs, comparing LOD0 and LOD4 shows that LOD4 has much less information. This is especially evident when you switch to wireframe mode and compare the number of polygons between LOD0 and LOD4. The last thing is about the material of this object. If I open this material instance, you will get the same parameters in detail as we explained in the simple material instance before. However, in the global section, we don't have a parameter for controlling the tiling since the texture of this material is specified for this specific object. This is because the texture is custom made for this specific object, perfectly fitting its UV layout, eliminating the need for additional tiling adjustments and ensuring optimal detail and realism. If you select this mesh, you can see how this material will look on an object in the preview mode. If you don't know what is UV mapping and texturing are crucial for creating realistic 3D models. UV mapping involves flattening a 3D model to apply textures accurately, while texturing adds color and detail. Together, they wrap a 2D image around a 3D model seamlessly, enhancing its realism. In our case, we use UV mapping to ensure the texture perfectly fits our 3D object, making it look lifelike. Back to our project view. Now if I go here and look at the reference viewer on our material for this object, I see the connection and how everything from the materials instance to the materials and textures works together to form that shape. Let's go back to our project and examine these inside the scene. So I will come to one corner and turn off the grid for now. If I want to bring this inside the scene, I can just drag and drop it into the scene. If you try to rotate this, you will notice that the backside of this will not cast a shadow, so be careful when building your scene. You have to consider this point. Let's bring it back. So, if I want to make any changes to the wall material, I can open it and make changes to see them directly in the scene. I'm going to just move it a little bit to the side, and right here, I can change the albedo color and bring the brightness down. So this is changing very easily. But how I can use the material that I downloaded from the Megascan library in the scene? First of all, we need an object to which we can apply the material. So bring a cube into the scene and put it here. I have multiple ways of applying the tile material we brought to the scene. I can either apply it by dragging and dropping it into a cube in the scene, or while the object is selected, you can see that the material is assigned to it in its details. I can select the material I want in the browser and assign it to the object I want. So now, like before, If I make changes to my material, I can see them here. Lastly, let's talk about when and how we should duplicate our material instance. Imagine if I had multiple copies of an object, in this case, our wall. If I opened my material instance editor, whatever changes I made here would be shown on both objects as well. And as a matter of the fact, any other instances of our wall object will do the same. But what if I want to change the material on just one specific instance of the wall in the scene? I can duplicate my material and apply it to that specific object in the scene. Now we can change the material properties independently of the first material. This lesson on transitioning from blocking to building our environment in Unreal Engine covered accessing the Quixel Megascans library, integrating high-quality 3D assets and materials, and optimizing performance. In our next lesson, we'll explore Nanite technology for managing detailed assets. Let's explore the revolutionary Nanite technology in this quick lesson without further introduction. Nanite is a revolutionary virtualized geometry technology that allows artists to create highly detailed worlds without worrying about performance or resource limitations. It efficiently handles large numbers of polygons by loading and rendering only visible details. This means you can import high-resolution assets directly into your project without creating multiple levels of detail manually. Nanite enables unprecedented levels of detail and complexity in scenes while maintaining smooth performance, transforming the way we work with 3D assets. Let's explore Nanite's capabilities. Let's find the object that we downloaded recently. This time, I'm going to download this object using Nanite quality. You will immediately notice that it's going to take much longer to download an object than it was before, since it is going to have much more detail and be larger in size as well. After downloading it, let's just add it to the project. As you can see, we have a new static mesh and another material instance. If I hover over two static meshes in the folder, we see their detail. You will immediately notice that one of their disk sizes is nearly 1 megabyte and the other is 81 megabytes. How big of a difference is that? One is much larger than the other. Also, you see that the material instance has an 8K resolution, compared with the 4K it had before. For the sake of this training, I will reset my changes to the material from the previous version so we can compare them better. If I open this static mesh, it doesn't seem any different here. It seems like the old method, the old static mesh that we had. However, if you go to the LODs, you will see no LODs other than one. Also, you will see that Nanite support is activated. So what's happening? Why doesn't it have any LODs and how is it handling optimization? If you go to view mode and select the wireframe, you will see that this mesh has an insane number of polygons compared to what we had in LODs. To compare, let's bring it and put it side by side with the one with LODs. Also, in the outliner, I will turn off the rest of the project, including the helpers. Let's go to the view mode and the wireframe to see the difference. You see, one of them has much more detail than the other one, regardless of our distance from the objects. While the object on the right jumps to a different LODs version, our Nanite version keeps many details. But let's take a look at how it works in the background. If we go to the view mode, then to Nanite visualization and select triangulation, we see that this technology uses some sort of triangulation instead of LODs. Nanite triangulation takes a detailed 3D model and breaks it into small clusters of triangles. These clusters are streamed dynamically based on the camera's position, showing more detail up close and less detail from a distance. This ensures high performance and detail without manual LODs creation. Also, if you want to see the clusters that Nanite uses to make triangulation, you can from Nanite visualization in view mode, you can select clusters. If you want to see which objects are using Nanite or not, you can simply go to Nanite visualization, select the mask, and see which objects have Nanite enabled. Let's look at how we can enable Nanite for a mesh. For example, let's activate it for our mesh with LODs. I can simply select the object, go to its details, find the mesh assigned to that object, right-click, and activate Nanite there. So essentially, if you activate Nanite for an object that has LODs, it is going to use the LOD version 0, which has the highest amount of detail, and use its visualization process. Now, both of them are using Nanite technology and no longer use LODs. Let's go back to the lit mode and from the outliner, turn on the rest of the models. If you go to Nanite masks, you see that these two objects use Nanite, but the rest of the project does not. By the end of the training, everything will be Nanite. Nanite has some limitations at this moment. For example, it does not support translucent materials, so objects like glass or water cannot be used. You will notice that the windows are separated in this object because Nanite does not support translucency. They separated the glass from the rest of the model. Hopefully, in the future, they will figure out how to use Nanite on objects with translucency. There are some other limitations with Nanite as well, but they expand their capabilities with any new release. In our lesson, we covered how Nanite manages high-resolution assets without manual LOD creation. Next, we'll discuss modular design and engine optimization for improved performance and project management efficiency. In this lesson, we'll use modular design to build a detailed scene. We'll explore the Quixel Megascan library to learn how to create larger structures using modular pieces. By the end, you'll be able to efficiently use Nanite assets and modular design to create detailed environments. Let's get started. I have already gone to Quixel Megascan library, so I can find an example to discuss modular design. If I go to the Environment Urban collection and look at the renders, I'll see references showing large environments and buildings built with modular pieces. Instead of 3D modeling or scanning a whole building, they use parts of a building and copy and paste them to build a larger one. This technique is effective for creating any environment, including games or cinematics. Imagine if you wanted to scan a building with a high level of detail and texture. The texture would have to be reduced because you couldn't capture that much detail in one scan. But now, since they only need to scan portions of a building, the quality and resolution of the objects and materials are much better. As you can see in these references or renders, they already have some modular designs we can use inside Unreal Engine. I have already decided on this and downloaded a lot of assets that I need. I have a list of assets I will provide you so you can follow along. Copy and paste the asset ID here and add it to your favorites to download. I have already tested these assets, so if you want to follow along, just download all of them. I'm copying and pasting the asset IDs here to find them immediately and add them to my favorites so I can add them all in one go. If I go to the favorite, you will see what I have collected and what I need to build my buildings. Since I have already downloaded them with Nanite quality, I can add them to my project. When I export them, they will be added to my project as Nanite assets. Now, in my content browser, I see that I have downloaded many assets to work with, each containing many items. I can drag and drop them one by one into the scene, but it's not a good practice. Instead, I will filter out all the static meshes in this folder. Now, it shows me all the static meshes in the folder. You can also apply filters to insulate any other kind of actors. For example, the static meshes are filtered here, and I can select everything I need from them. I can drag and drop everything I need into my scene. First, right-click to create a folder in the outliner to keep it clean. I'll call it Modular Design. Now, let's hide other things and focus on our objects. If you want to select all items inside a folder, you can open it and select them all. Or right-click and select All Dependents. Press F to focus on all the items in the folders. To clean things up, I'll spread them out to see what's inside the folder. Since I have built this scene once, I know I don't need some of these items. I have all my pieces together and everything is in the same row. I will turn on the blocking now and note that 4 pieces of modular buildings can cover my building. It will be good enough for me. I'll move things around to build 4 rows of these. As I go through these steps, I decide where to place each item. Let me put a bookmark here so I can return whenever I want. Now that I have spread everything out, if I compare it with my blocking, I think it will cover the building nicely. Now it is the time to talk about some engine modifications. At the top it says Texture Streaming Pool Size over the amount. What does this mean? In Unreal Engine, Texture streaming pool size over the amount means that the memory allocated for loading textures is full. This happens when there are too many high-resolution textures, causing performance issues. You may need to increase the texture streaming pool size to fix this. If I come to the command line here and type rstreaming.poolsize, hit enter, and click on the output log, you will see 1000, which is the current size of our pool. But apparently, it's not enough, and now we are much over it. When the texture streaming pool size is not enough, we usually get low-resolution textures. So, if you see your textures don't seem right in the scene and viewport, it might be one of the problems. So, if I want to increase it, I can just copy this and put 2000. When I enter, you see that the node from the top disappears because right now, if I type rstreaming pool size, again, the new streaming pool size is 2000. However, any settings changed in Unreal Engine from the command line will only be temporary. If the engine is closed and reopened, it will revert to the default settings. In our case, if I save our changes, restart the engine, and go to my working level. Please note that you do not see your levels or other items in your content folder. Remember that we put this static mesh filter here, so we must deactivate it to see all items in the folder and open our level. If I type rstreaming.poolsize and hit enter in the output log again, we have 1000. Everything you put in the command line is adjusted for that session only. If you want this change to be permanent, bring it to your engine configuration. So, let's copy this, close the engine, and in the configuration section, open the default engine.ini file. You see many settings here. You can set it again by just typing rstreaming.poolsize equal in one of the lines, but this time with 2000 or maybe 3000 to solve our texture streaming pool size. However, it's good practice to increase it gradually, so don't jump to a very high number. As we go, you can save this and restart your engine again. Now, if I go to my level, go to the command line and type rstreaming.poolsize, you will see that it is 3000. So, if you see that message and notice that many textures in your scene are not shown correctly, gradually increase the streaming pool size. If your computer lacks high specifications, such as a powerful graphics card and CPU, which can cause problems with your project while you are working on it, you can adjust the project's quality to ensure smooth operation. You can adjust the settings in engine scalability. For example, if you lower the quality, textures are shown worse, and as you go lower, the quality decreases further. You will see an immediate boost in frames per second as you lower the quality. Epic is the default setting. From the Epic default setting, if we go to a higher setting like Cinematic, we see an increase in quality. However, keep it on Epic or lower while working and switch to higher settings for final results if you are making a cinematic experience, but most of the time default settings should be fine. I brought these two cubes to explain a simple, very important method for modular design. If I select any actor, I can move it according to the gizmo. However, what if I want to change the location of the gizmo? I can hold the middle mouse button while holding it over the gizmo and drag it anywhere. Then, I can move the object from the new gizmo location. However, the gizmo returns to its original place if I deselect the object. To solve this, one way is to right-click and set the pivot point as an offset. So if I deselect and reselect the object, the gizmo stays in the same place. If I want to snap the pivot point to a corner, I hold Alt+V while moving the pivot point while holding the middle mouse button and snap it to some vertices on the object. As you may remember from our explanation about a 3D object, vertex in a 3D object is a point where edges in a mesh connect, forming the surfaces of the model like the corners of a cube. So I set it as a pivot offset in vertex, which is in one of the corners for better control. It stays there. Now, I can move this object from this corner. If I want to put this in the corner of another object, I hold V on the keyboard while I try to move it, which causes it to snap to any vertices in the scene. I can easily make a copy by holding Alt on the keyboard, moving around the cube, and starting to build. I can snap it by holding V and moving the cube with the gizmo around. This is the fundamental technique for assembling modular pieces. Let's delete them for now and return to our view. I will use the same technique to build this building. First, I'll start here and make a copy. As I selected this, I noticed that the gizmo was not in the right place, so I hold Alt and V to position the gizmo correctly and set it. When selected, I can move the object close to the other one. See how it fits nicely here. I will keep doing this for different pieces as well. If there is a small mistake, I can just eyeball it. Once selected, I can copy both and change the gizmo for both. I'll put the gizmo in the right place, snap it here, and then do the same for the others. Since we don't have good vertices here, honestly, I think eyeballing it is kind of okay. Yeah, so we have this corner. I can either rotate it or scale it to a negative degree. For example, around -1 it will scale nicely for us. Then I just put it here. I think I need to make a little bit of adjustments here. So, I think our object is mostly done and I have to make the back side of it. If I go to the top view, I can select and copy the selection, rotate it 90 degrees, and put it here. If I go into perspective mode, you will see that it will sit nicely. This is a slight modification. Also, I want to put a bookmark here to return to this many times. If I come here and change the direction of the light, you see some weird shadows here. As I said, the back side of this will not cast a shadow, so we have to put a ceiling on top of this. So I went here and brought the sun back to where it was. As you can see, we don't have a roof for this building. I want to build a roof for this so that it will get the correct shadows. I'm going to use a cube. I will bring a cube to my scene to make a roof. If I go to the lit mode and nanite optimization and mask, you see that my cube is not a nanite object. So I want to turn the cube into a nanite object before I use it as a roof for my building. Let's go back to lit mode. If I select the cube and go to detail, then I can find where it's located inside my engine on static mesh. As you see, it is located somewhere inside the engine content, so I can simply right-click and activate Nanite for this object. However, since this cube is an engine asset, I don't want to modify it. Instead of using this one, I will make a duplicate and call this duplicate Nanite cube. I'm going to use this cube instead. I'm going to move this cube to another folder, my content folder. Inside the content folder, I'm going to create another folder called Meshes. I'm going to bring the cube here. Instead of using that cube, I'm going to use this cube, and I can activate Nanite for this cube here. I'm going to delete the other one and use this one. If I go and check it, you see that it is a Nanite object. I'm going to one of the orthographic views, like the top view, and using this cube to make a ceiling just by scaling it. I'm going to perspective view and moving this cube up over here. As you see, this cube has no material, so I will find material for it inside the Quixel Megascan library. I already decided on this material, and I think it is suitable for my roof. The high quality is good enough, so I will download it and add it to my project. I can drag and drop it to my object when I'm back inside the viewport. I can also change the tiling for the roof to something around this, and even make it a little bit brighter to match the rest of the building. Now that we have a roof, let's talk about the windows. I brought 2 wood planks to cover up my windows. I won't cover glass material in this training because it is a complicated material I will cover in other courses. Let's cover our windows with these planks. So, I simply moved this to cover my openings. It's just a matter of moving things around. I'm considering covering these diagonally, as if someone is covering an abandoned building. Even making multiple copies, it's just a matter of copying and pasting to cover this window. I will also cover other windows, but it makes sense to cover them from inside instead of outside. My building is ready. I just have to make some minor adjustments to some parts. We've covered a lot in this lesson, including an introduction to modular design. Remember, modular design is a powerful technique that allows you to create complex and detailed environments efficiently. In the next lesson, we will discuss organizational techniques like grouping, creating packed level actors, and parenting. In this lesson, we'll cover essential organizational techniques, including using folders, grouping, and packed level actors to keep your projects tidy and manageable. Let's get started. If your scene is too bright inside the outliner, you can select your directional light and adjust the intensity in its details for now. I will discuss lighting in detail later, but let's decrease the intensity of your directional light for now. Now that we have our first building, I want to discuss some organizational techniques. We have already discussed how important organization is, especially as projects get larger. It becomes increasingly difficult to manage a project as it grows. So, let's discuss the organizational techniques we have here. The first one is that if you go to the top view and select everything you have here, then inside the outliner, you can right-click and move everything to a folder, and name your folder Building 1. Essentially, you can create a folder in your outliner for your building. This is the first organizational technique, but it is somewhat limiting. Let's talk about grouping. I can select all the items that I have in my folder. If I right-click, I can group them all, or when they are selected, I can press Ctrl+G on the keyboard. I have created a group with the building. This allows me to select the entire building with just one click and move it as a single unit. If I right-click in the grouping, I can unlock the group and make some changes to my group. Then, when I'm done with my changes, I can simply return to the group and lock it again. Now you see my changes made their way into the group. I can also unlock the group and remove an object from the group. When I lock it again, you see that the object is out of the group. If I select the group again, I can regroup it as a new group, or select the object that is out of the group and add it back to the group. Let's lock it again. We must mention that grouping has some limitations. First, every change I make to one group will not transfer to the copies I made from it. Also, if I try to scale the group, you will see that it disrupts the organization I made for this building. So, what is the other option I have here? Instead of grouping, we have another option. I'm going to delete my copies and ungroup my building. Now that I have ungrouped them, I will select everything and right-click, and this time I will go level. You have two options: create level instance and create packed level actor. Both of them will create a mini level that includes everything you selected. The difference between create level instance and create packed level actor is simple. Create level instance reuses a part of your level, making it efficient for repeating sections without duplicating them. Create packed level actor does the same, but also creates a blueprint, a visual script that allows for advanced control and customization of the grouped elements. Blueprints enable you to add custom logic and adjust parameters easily. The second option gives you more flexibility, so I will select it and hit OK to create a packed level. I will make another folder called PL and then save my file as packed level building 01. When I create it, it will also ask me where I want to save the blueprint. I'll save it in the same place. inside my content drawer are two new items, a blueprint and a level. Also, looking at your outliner, you will see that everything we selected has become one packed level instance. The most important thing is that right now, you can use this building not only in different locations of this level, but also in different levels and even different projects. If I want to go to my packed level, I must save all the changes I made. Inside the level, I have to change the view option to unlit mode to see what is inside since there is no lighting. You'll see that we essentially put everything we selected inside a level. This mini level helps us stay organized and can be used in any other project. But what is the difference between this packed level and the blueprint we made? You will see the same building in the blueprint viewport if I go to the blueprint. The difference here is that you can control some of the parameters and build some logic into it with a blueprint. For example, if we had a series of lights, we could set a logic here to turn them on and off. Let me go back to my level. Please note, you have to close the blueprint and change the view option back to lit mode inside the viewport, and turn off the helpers. You can add this packed level to your scene from your content folder by dragging and dropping it. And you can have multiple instances of it by just copying it around. If you make just one copy, let's delete other copies for now. If you want to change the building, you need to right-click and select Edit. After I make the changes that I am looking for, when I exit, you will notice that the changes I made are applied to the other instance I have there. Let's reset it to what it was. If I select the Scale tool and try to make some modifications, I notice I can easily make any modifications I want, and they won't break. It is a very powerful tool to have handy in your workflow. Okay, right now, I want to make another building, but this time, I want it to be one story. So, I'm going to Edit mode and pressing Ctrl+A to select everything. However, I don't need the pivot they made for this building, so I deselect it. Here, I'm going to press Ctrl+C and exit. I will then be able to hide this building and press Ctrl+V to bring back all the items that we picked. I'm going to make a one-story building out of this. So, I'm going to one of the side views, delete the second floor as I don't need it, and return to my perspective. I created a ceiling for my building using roof components downloaded from the Megascans library to cover the roof. This will be exactly like what we have practiced for our creations until now, so let's just make it. I will copy and place this on top of my building and make more copies to cover up this building. I need this piece and will mirror it along the red axis. So, in the Details panel, I can set the scale to -1. From the left view, I can select everything and bring it down. I can make a copy in the top view, rotate it 180 degrees to cover the side, and place and adjust it. From the left view, I can select everything and scale it down. I will bring this down here and then go to the perspective view to see it. Also, I can go to the bottom view to adjust its location. While we have our roof selected, I want to adjust and scale it from different directions. Sometimes scaling it in different directions doesn't work. What is the solution here? I am going to use another solution, which is parenting. This helps me scale the roof correctly without destroying our organization. I will select one of the roof items and, inside the outliner, rename it to roof. Then, I go to one of the views, select everything related to the roof, and drag everything under the roof item that we renamed. Now, the roof is the parent of any item attached to it, so if we do a scaling operation on the roof, it will transfer scale information to any child, or in other words, the item attached to it. I used the other roof item that I downloaded to cover the bottom of the roof, and select everything from the top view and pack another level for this building. Now that I have two buildings that I made using modular design principles, I turn on my blocking and place my new building in place of their placeholder. In this lesson, we discussed organizational techniques in Unreal Engine 5. We covered adjusting scene lighting, creating folders and groups for better asset management, and using packed level actors for advanced control and customization. Mastering these techniques can help you efficiently manage and organize your projects, making your workflow smoother and more productive. In the next lesson, we will explore additional techniques that will help us build our scene even more effectively. In this lesson, I want to discuss a very useful tool for assembling a scene, the pattern. This tool helps us make instances or copies of an object and place them in a chosen pattern. In our case, we want to use the pattern to build out the mini port here. Before building the port, let's complete the scene a bit more. First, I downloaded this stone wall and added it to the scene. As mentioned, I want to provide the asset ID for any items I use in the description below. I used all of the techniques we learned about modular design to build a wall for my complex. Later, I downloaded this mossy pavers material to cover the ground. However, before I applied this material to the ground, I replaced the placeholder cubes I used to build my ground with Nanite cubes made in the previous version, so we could have Nanite on all the elements in the scene. Later, I just applied the material to the cube and adjusted the tiling while looking at my human figure to determine the correct scale for tiling. Remember, since I built my ground with two separate cubes, I had to make a duplicate from my tile material and apply it to the second cube to adjust its repetition and size to match the first cube. Let's move on to building the mini port here. I found these three pieces in the Megascan library and will add them to my project to build my port using the pattern tool. I go to my content drawer, isolate the items I added to my project, and drag them to the scene. Let's clean up the outliner by putting everything in a folder and calling it port. So let's start building the port. Let's start with the columns. I want to place the columns in front. Other than placing them one by one, another way that I can spread out the columns is by going to the modeling tools, Xform, and pattern. As you can see, it will create an array of columns for me, and there is a gizmo that allows me to change the location of this array. You can access many options to optimize this array, but let's focus on some of the most important ones. For example, you can have it over a grid or a circle, but right now I'm going to arrange it over a line. Two parameters are important when arranging them over a line. One is the extent that I want the array to cover, and the second is the count number of items I want to make the array from. You also have some other options to play with, but I want to rotate my items to make it more randomized. One feature is that I can apply a jitter so every item has a different rotation to make it more randomized. Also, on the scale side, you can see that I can scale the items accordingly. I will also change the scale here and place it in the location I want. I'm adjusting it with the scale, considering how big I want this to be. Also, you see that the scale is proportional, so you can adjust it in one direction if you want to. I want to make deeper columns, and I believe this is a good count, but I need one more. I can extend it a little bit more here as well. If you want to save all the changes you have made until now, you must hit accept at the bottom. But before I accept it, click on separate actor. so it will place an instance of the original actors in the line to grade the array. If you don't check this option, it will create a new account or object from the combination of all the columns in the array, and in your case, we don't need that. There are two reasons why keeping them separate is much better. First, by keeping them separate, you are just using the instances of the original column instead of creating a new object from the combination of them, which will help keep your project's file size low. Secondly, Nanite will work much better on separate pieces. This is a very complicated topic, but I leave a link to a detailed explanation if you want to know why. We will see that many new items have been selected inside the outliner as soon as we accept. Let's do the same thing this time with this item. I'm going to select the pattern. As you see, my old changes are still here, so I will reset some of the changes I made in the last throw. I think just changing the scale of these will be useful for me at this point, and I will adjust accordingly here. I can scale it up, make it more like this, and then hit accept. In each case, we don't need the original version anymore. In the last attempt, I want to hide all of these items. We don't need these. I want to use this to cover the top. As you can see, it is going in the wrong direction, so I can easily come here and find the correct angle. I'm going to put this in the center. And just extend this and hit accept. We don't need the original one anymore. I can select these and move forward a bit. Here, I think I need a copy of this to turn and make it like this and bring it up to cover this. I'm going to clean up my outliner by putting everything in the port, and I'm going to go back to selection mode. As you can see, we are done building our buildings. Now I'm going to discuss the next lesson, which will involve landscapes. In this lesson, I want to discuss landscapes. We've constructed our building. It's time to create the landscape. First, press Ctrl plus Shift plus S on your keyboard to save all the changes you've made throughout the project. Since we are moving to another aspect of the project, let's save our current project at another level, a different version of this level, so we can return to our scene and build upon it. If you make a mistake, we have something to fall back on. We can collapse all of these here as well. As you can see, I have an idea of how my landscape will look, but I need to start building it. To construct a landscape, you must go to landscape mode. When you enter landscape mode at the top, you will see a grid where your landscape will be situated. We have options like manage, sculpt, and paint in the landscape mode. Managing is for creating a landscape. Sculpt is used to create hills and vary the high and low areas in the landscape, including mountains and other features. The paint section involves painting materials in different landscape areas, which I will discuss later. There are two ways of creating landscapes: creating them directly in Unreal Engine or importing them from a file. Importing from a file involves using a height map to generate the landscape. However, we will not explore this option at this point. You can also pick a material in advance if you have a specific landscape material or one you wish to use. You can apply this material now or after you create the landscape. The most important option here is grid size, which can increase the landscape size if we need more space. However, the original grid works fine for this training. When we hit create, it will create a landscape for us and immediately take us to the sculpt section. In the manage section, you will find options to add or delete areas of the landscape. The sculpt section provides options for sculpting the landscape. You won't see anything in the paint section because we have yet to apply any material. You'll see many sculpting options if I go to the sculpt section. The most important ones are sculpt, erase, smooth, flatten, and ramp. The others are less used, and you can explore them later on by yourself. Going through all of them doesn't make sense since there are so many options. Let's explore the sculpt options. You'll see an adjustable size and fall off brush when I bring the brush into view. If I just click, the landscape will rise. If I hold Shift and click, it will lower. This simple technique allows you to shape your landscape. You can also adjust the strength of your movements. If you decrease the strength, each click will be less effective. If you increase it, each click will be more impactful. In the Erase section, you can erase what you've done. The Smooth option will smooth out your changes with other tools. For example, if you've made several changes, you can quickly smooth them out. The brush settings will remain the same. The Flatten option allows you to create flat areas where you select. The Ramp option lets you create a ramp between 2 points. You can also control the ramp's width and fall off. Hit Add Ramp to add it to your landscape. Finally, let's use the Erase tool to erase all my changes. You can also reset the brush's settings. Now, let's bring back the blocking and the building. Based on my views, I will create a landscape. I'm going to Sculpt mode, making my brush much bigger. I will click a few times to see my ground. Remember, you can always use Ctrl+Z to undo. Now, I will change the size of my brush and build my landscape. Here, my goal is to create a lake. Remember, if you go to selection mode, for example, right now I want to make this area much more prominent, so I have a reference point for the water area of my lake. If I go to landscape mode again, I can make changes. Holding Shift to push it down and just clicking to bring it up takes a little time. I always switch to smooth mode to smooth out whatever I have created. Also, I frequently check my view to see how things are progressing. At some point, I won't need my block out anymore, so I can toggle it off and on. At this point, I'm happy with what I've made, and it matches my original idea quite well. The high points are higher, but we are in an excellent place to move on to the next step. For the next step, I will apply a material to my landscape. One point to note is that under Detail section of your landscape, you can also activate Nanite for the landscape. If you activate Nanite now, you must rebuild it here whenever you make any changes. If you see a weird shadow, it's nothing special. Just turn it off and on once, and it should resolve. Now, if I go to the Nanite visualization, I see that everything is Nanite. However, since we will adjust our landscape, we should hold off on enabling Nanite until we finish our project, because if we make any small changes, we have to rebuild again. So we deactivate it for now. Right now, we know that we didn't upload the material at the beginning of the project, so if I select my landscape in its details, you'll see a slot for landscape material. You can use any material for landscape material. However, if you want to paint different materials on a landscape, for instance, one side dry and one wet, you must use a specific landscape material. Creating landscape material is very complicated, and I'll explain it in my later courses, but right now, we can head to the marketplace to find some free. So, let's go to the marketplace. I have searched the marketplace for various landscape materials and found a useful one called Grass Landscape Material. This landscaping material uses 7 layers on top of each other to paint different sections of your landscape with any of these. These materials support the engine version 5.3, but as I mentioned, I'm working with 5.4. Adding a material supported by a lower engine version to a project with a higher supported engine version is usually fine, but it doesn't work the other way around. I already downloaded this material and added it to my wallet. Now I'm going to add it to the project. When you look here, you will not see your project because it is done with 5.4. To see your project, we'll hit Show All of the Projects. Here is your project. It says it's incompatible with your version, and you must select the closest version, 5.3. I will add this to my project. Since I already have it on my hard drive, the process is much faster for me. However, it might take a little time for you. If you want to see where your downloaded material is on your hard drive or remove it from your local drive, click here. But let's go to our project. In the content browser, I see another folder called Grass Landscape. It includes maps, materials, meshes, and textures. If I go to the map, you'll see a level with landscape examples for us to examine. I will use the standard version. The other two are advanced, and we don't need them now. When you select this landscape, go to its materials section under its details and locate the applied material. The material instance assigned to it is inside the content folder. You can also find the master material from which this material instance comes right beside this. The rest of the items in this folder are material functions. Material functions essentially contain the logic behind the material that builds our master material. We will extensively explore materials in the later course. Let's go back to our level. While the landscape is selected in its details, we can assign the landscape material that we want here. I will find the material I want in the content folder. And everything turns white as soon as I apply it. If I switch to landscape mode now, you'll be able to see all the layers of my landscape material in the Paint tab. Remember that where we were creating the landscape, we didn't have anything here. At the same time, you'll notice a message saying that this layer has no layer information assigned yet. You must create or assign layer information before you can paint this layer. I have to explain it a bit more. We have observed that landscape materials are different from other materials. For example, grass, rock, or mud can be stacked on top of each other in a landscape. Layer information comes into play to determine which layer we want to see in any part of the landscape. This information holds the details about the materials in each part of the landscape, deciding whether we want to see a particular material. This is achieved using a black and white image to mask out parts of that layer. By painting this black and white image, we can allow our landscape to show through and be visible. So, over there, we see landscape layers, but you can only paint them once you create an information layer. You can create an information layer by clicking the plus icon next to each weight blended layer. For this landscape layer, click the plus icon, weight blended layer, to create an information layer. This information needs to be saved. After choosing this option, you will be prompted to save it somewhere in your content folder. In our case, if you go to the content folder and inside the grass landscape folder, you'll find a folder called layer files, where they have already saved information layers for different aspects of this material. This saves us the trouble of creating and keeping the layers ourselves. You can choose each layer by its name when selecting and assigning layers. Selecting None will automatically display the layer with the same name created for this landscape. You can then simply select it. After I update the first layer, I can see it in my scene. Then, I will apply other information layers to other landscape layers so that I can later paint on top of the first layer. After applying all the information layers, if I select another landscape layer while in paint mode and then select a paintbrush, I can start painting different layers of this material on top of each other. Please note that you have various controls over your brush's shape, size, and strength. If I select any of them, I can simply paint different layers of materials here. Also, I can pick a smooth brush to smooth the edges of the landscape I painted. If you right-click, you have the option to fill the layer, clear it, or rebuild it. Now that we understand how a landscape material works, we can begin painting our landscape. If you open the landscape material, you will notice that our landscape material instance has fewer parameters than the material we examined from the Megascan library. The creator of this material decided that we don't need those options. In a later course, I will show how we can create a landscape material with many options to control better how different material layers will appear. But for now, let's stick to what we have. As you can see, we just have control over the brightness, so I'm going to decrease the landscape brightness. I will use different layers to break out the repetitiveness of this material. I'm going to make one of the layers much darker and use it as the bottom of the lake, and I'm just going to paint other layers on top of each other to get something more interesting. When shooting this scene for a film, I'll focus on specific areas and use my creativity to make them attractive. I want to avoid unnecessary work and make the most of the visuals we're working with. I won't create the entire landscape for every angle, I'll just make something enjoyable for the angle I'm focusing on. At this point, I think we are done creating the landscape. I'll discuss water in the next lesson. In this lesson, I will discuss a simple solution for adding water to our scene. There are more advanced ways of adding water, from complicated materials to plugins that you can add to your engine to make the water. In my case, I will use some of Unreal Engine's free capabilities to create a body of water quickly. Let's begin. Let's save another version of our level since we will move to another step in our project. At the same time, we are done with the blocking, so I will delete my blocking level from the Windows level since I don't need it anymore here. As I said, there are many ways to make water inside Unreal Engine. However, the easiest way is to use one of the native plugins we can activate inside the engine. So, go to the settings and plugins and search for water. Activate these two plugins and restart the program. Let's return to the level we were working on. In Quickly Add to the project browser, I type water. Now, we have access to different bodies of water, from a lake to an ocean, which is similar, so if you understand the principle for one, you can apply it to others. In our training, I will make a lake. Like any other actor, you can just come here, drag and drop it into the scene. Building the shaders to show the water will take a little time, but it will bring a lake to your scene. To see what's going on here, I'm going to come back all the way here, and I'm going to move it over here to explain all of the options. I will move it to the side to explain the options available for this water. First, if you bring it up or down, it will change the water surface's location. If I go to my outliner and collapse everything, you will see I have 3 more assets that make this water possible right now. I'm going to put them in a layer and call it lake. Right now, the water body lake is the only actor you need to work on. If you go to its details, you see there are so many options here that it can be exhausting to review all of them. So, let's discuss the most important one. If you adjust the depth of wave attenuation, you will change the appearance of the water by altering the way waves appear in it. I increased it to get a calmer lake look. Also, if I hit the spline here, I can change these points. For example, I can move, rotate, and scale them to make them sharper. If I hold Alt and drag, I can create another point to shape the water. Back to the water component. The curve setting is the most important. Here, you can change the depth of the channel and make it deeper. You can also change the ramp to that depth. Additionally, you have control over the fall-off mode in the fall-off setting, so you can control edge of your body of water. These few items I checked are essential for creating any sort of water. The last important part is the material. When you go to rendering, you can find the water material. When you open it, you will see many options in detail. The most important one here is under Global Vector Parameter Values. You have absorption and scattering, which will change the color of the water. You have to play with it to get the color you want, but it is limited. However, it is the fastest way to have water in your scene. I will move the material window to the side so we can see the effects of our modification in real time. If I adjust the color absorption, the overall color of the water will change. Changing the scattering will affect how transparent the water appears or how much the color effect is visible. Experiment with it, and I'm sure you will discover something interesting. Let's get back to building our project. Since we've made some changes to our water, let's delete it and add it again to our scene. I'm going to come here and put a water lake. We can immediately see it. I will bring it down, go to the details, and go to the spline. By moving the spline around, you see that the water will adapt to the shape of the landscape, and at the same time, have some effect on our landscape. you may have noticed that some of our landscape is submerged underwater. In such cases, using landscape tools to fix the landscape is ineffective. Instead, we will use alternative methods in later lessons. For now, try to approximate the shape of the body of water you are looking for. I will increase the attenuation and bring the lake floor up in the terrain curve setting, as I don't want to make it too deep. Lastly, when I select water, if I collapse all categories under rendering, I can find these settings to change the color. I'm happy with what I made. Let's save everything and proceed to the next lesson, where I will explain 3D kitbashing to complete our landscape. I hope you are satisfied with your work so far. Adding water has somewhat ruined our landscape, especially in the foreground, but there's no need to worry about it. There are many other methods of creating our landscape that we can explore. In the foreground, we are introducing 3D kitbashing. Kitbashing involves taking parts from different 3D objects and combining them to create new models or environments. This efficient method fosters creativity, allowing quick assembly of detailed scenes. For example, you can combine wings, bodies, and thrusters from various spaceship models to create a new spaceship. This saves time and encourages innovative designs. For instance, in a forest scene, you can mix trees, rocks, and plants from different asset packs to create a realistic environment. Overall, kitbashing leverages existing assets to boost productivity and facilitate the creation of intricate, visually stunning environments. Let's integrate it into our project. If I go to the Quixel Megascans library, I already selected some rocks I want to use for kitbashing. Remember, when you build a 3D model, you start with large details and then move on to medium and small details. For example, if I select this, just look at the size over here and how large this object is. Considering the size is very important. This rock is about the size of a human, but the other one is about the size of a building. Start placing the larger ones first and then working on the minor details. Let's send everything inside Unreal Engine for our project. I already downloaded them and will just send them to the project. Now that we have sent everything inside the engine, I can access my Megascans 3D assets inside newly created folders. If I select the folders and activate the static meshes filter, I can see them in one place and bring them inside the scene. Let's clean up the outliner again in folders. Now, take a look at what we brought inside Unreal Engine. Let's hide other things so that we can focus on the rocks and our lighting. We have a huge rock here and a few smaller ones. Let's arrange them from large to small, and remember that we will use Nanite quality for each item. We are going to use these assets to build our environment. Let's return to the landscape and I will start building my project. I start with the most significant part and then place the largest assets according to my view. I want to start by rebuilding what we lost while adding a water lake to the landscape. Something like that will work fine for us. Remember, you can always select your camera to see the view and pilot it to find an angle that works. After adjusting the camera, I can exit. If I want to see the camera preview while I'm making my scene, I can pin the preview here and lock it. As I build the scene, I can see the effect of my changes inside the camera. For instance, at this moment, I am making my foreground with kitbashing elements that I brought in. We are addressing the foreground by creatively repurposing assets to fill all the gaps. As you may recall from the previous lesson, the backside of the objects does not cast shadows. To avoid lighting issues later on, complete what you create from each angle. This will help us avoid problems when we change the direction of the light. Please note that the arc bowl tool we activated in this project's first lesson is a lifesaver since we can freely orient our assets regardless of the axis. I am moving away from the foreground and adding more details to the midground. I moved to the background and tried adding more detail to the mountains I made in the previous lesson with my landscape tool. The goal here is to add more detail and break the skyline. Remember that you can always go back to landscape mode to adjust the landscape to fit your newly added objects. I also went to the paint section of landscape tools and painted a layer of landscape closer to my rocks around the edges so I could blend the rocks with the landscape. After adding large details, it is time to use our medium-sized details, so I used some of the smaller pieces I brought to address my scene. Lastly, it is time to add small details. I think we are in good shape. We've covered the basics of 3D kitbashing and how to start building our environment with large, medium, and small details. In the next lesson, we'll add more details. Now that we are done with the major buildings and the environment, I will start adding props to add more detail to my buildings. One of the best sources for us to get a variety of props and assets is the Quixel Megascans library. If I go to the Quixel Megascans library from the bridge, I have selected and downloaded some assets I would like to bring into my project. I will put the asset IDs for all these assets in this video's description so you can follow what I am doing. Since I have already downloaded them, I can start and export them to the project as Nanite objects. Now, if I go to my content drawer, I will see a lot of new objects that I have added to my project. Remember to use the filter to filter the assets in the folder you are looking at. Here, I will select the ones I want to bring to my project. Remember that some previews of these objects may not show because of loading purposes, but you don't need to see them. You can just read the description to know what they are. If you double-click, open, and close each item, the preview option will be shown. However, it is okay if it doesn't show because you can always read and select the asset's name. I'm going to select and drag and drop them into the scene. As you can see, all the assets that I selected are now on the scene. I will right-click, put them in a folder and call it Props. Let's arrange it so we can see what we brought into the scene. This will make it easier for us to place them in different locations. Let's turn off the visibility of some other assets so you can see all the new assets I downloaded and brought into Unreal Engine to scatter around my scene. Before I start scattering, I want to introduce another solution. What if you want to get some assets from another project to this project? For example, I have this scene with 2 assets and would like to bring them into my other project. I will show you how to transfer these 2 assets from this project to a different one. First, select your object. You will find the static mesh associated with this object in the details from there. I can find it in my content folder. This is the static mesh I want to transfer. When you send this object to another project, all the materials and textures associated with it will also be transferred. Right-click, go to Asset Actions, and select Migrate. As you can see in this window, sending this asset to another project will take all of the items connected to this asset, from texture to materials and materials located in different folders. Also, you may not need some of them, so you can deactivate their migration to another project. I originally acquired these 2 assets from the Megascans asset library. Click OK. Now, you must find the folder for the project you are working on and select the content folder. It is essential to choose the project content folder. When I select this folder, it will ask if I want to override some existing materials, as they are similar. Since these assets are from the Megascans library, they use the same master materials as what I already have in the project, so if you haven't made any changes to the master material, overwriting them doesn't matter. Remember, you can always choose multiple items and perform the same action. If I return to the content drawer, I will see the new asset I brought from the other project. Just look for them in the same folder. Now that I have everything, I want to discuss one more thing before scattering. What if I want to bring some assets from other sources? For example, I found this boat on Sketchfab, which fits my scene. I downloaded the file as FBX with its textures and want to get it inside my scene so I can place it somewhere in the scene. First, in your content browser, let's remove the filter. We already have a mesh folder in your content folder. Let's make another folder and call it boat. Now, if I go inside the folder, I have multiple ways of importing the asset. I can right-click and go to Import to find the asset. For example, this is the asset that I want to bring in. Also, you can hit Import here to find the asset and bring it in. When you open it, it will ask you about some options. The only thing is to build it as a Nanite object so we don't have to make changes afterward. The rest of the settings are okay, so let's import it to the folder. Right now, you see that it imported the asset with the material. It's an FBX asset with the material and textures. Let's save them since we see the asterisk. If I open the static mesh, I see the boat is very small in the middle. Let's close it and open its material. The material on the ship is simple and less sophisticated than the materials used for the Megascans library. Only textures are assigned to the different aspects of the material, and we don't have as many items that we can adjust as we did in the material instance, but it is okay at this point. I will just drag the boat into the middle of the scene. Since it is unrealistically small, I can make it much larger and put it near the other boats I have here. Now you know how to bring 3D objects from another resource besides Megascan library to the Unreal Engine. Now that we have all the assets for our project, we can start experimenting with them and placing them throughout the scene. From now on, it's just a matter of moving things around. We can move objects and fill the scene with these assets. There isn't anything special about this process. It's simply about scattering your objects in a way that makes sense for your scene, moving and placing different copies in different directions to create a realistic environment. I'm constantly adjusting and placing objects in interesting ways. You can spend as much time as you want spreading and adding details to your scene. I'm copying and pasting the same items in different directions and locations. You can keep doing this for hours to get the final result you are looking for. Thank you for following along. In the next lesson, we will discuss color correction to enhance the visual quality of our project. Let's talk about the color adjustments. At first glance, the assets I added to the scene seem very bright. Also, my environment should have a greenish tint, but the buildings are not in that color space. If you want to check the value of the colors, you can switch to unlit mode. You will immediately notice that the buildings and items I added to the scene are bright and lack a greenish tint. The goal is to have everything in the same color mode so that when you squint your eyes, you don't see any jarring contrasts and everything looks uniform. To achieve this, we try to match textures and materials by adjusting their brightness and other color parameters to achieve homogeneity. Remember, we have to stay in unlit mode to understand colors well, because in lit mode, when we have a light source, it can change the color rendition of our assets. So start with unlit and adjust it there, then you can return to lit mode and test it there. For example, I can go to editor mode, choose one of these items and find the associated material. Here is the related material. I came out of the edit, so I have a correct understanding of what colors look like for this asset compared to the rest of the building, and I will make some changes. For example, I will decrease the brightness of the albedo by half and add a slight greenish tint to it. Then I will copy the tint and brightness values. Go again to edit mode to quickly be able to locate the materials for other parts of the buildings, apply the same changes to different parts of the building, and ensure that all the building assets look harmonious and appropriate within the scene. Colors look more harmonious across the scene. I will do the same for the roof of this building. I will return to edit mode, select the roof material, exit this mode, bring down the value, and apply the tint. Everything looks good. However, I'm not happy with the tint. It was too strong, so I will adjust it to make it less pronounced. I will copy this adjusted tint and apply it to the rest of the models. Now, it looks much better. If I enter unlit mode, you will see that everything is harmonious. You can redo these steps multiple times to be happy with what you have in the scene. I will apply the same process to the other assets in the scene. For example, some assets look out of place. I will open the material, reduce the brightness, and apply a greenish tint. I will do the same for other elements. If you squint your eyes, you shouldn't be able to see the difference, and everything should blend. Even these ground assets need some tint to match the rest of the scene's color space. It's getting better, and making the ground material a bit darker will help it blend better. I will continue adjusting these values. There is one outlier in our scene. It is the boat that we brought in from the Sketchfab. When we brought in the FBX file, it automatically created a material. However, we don't have any control over this material, as we had over the material instances we had in the Quixel Megascans library assets. So, what is the solution here? Right now, I want to darken the albedo color of this material, and consequently the boat. There is a dirty trick here. It's the texture color associated with this boat. If we find the texture in the content browser and open it, on the right side, we will see that we have some control over it. Let's make the texture window smaller and put it on the side. You can reduce the brightness and see the result in the viewport. So let's adjust the texture, which automatically adjusts the material's color and fits the boat in the scene. Overall, we are in a much better place regarding the coloring. If I enter light mode, you will see that everything is harmonious. You can always play your game here and walk around to see all the assets in action. In the next lesson, we will discuss how to use foliage mode to add some vegetation to our scene. In this lesson, I will discuss tools we can access when working in foliage mode. At first, you might think that foliage is just a collection of tools for scattering vegetation in the scene, but most importantly, you can scatter anything using foliage tools. Let's explore some of them. Press Ctrl plus Shift plus S to save all my changes and the current level as a new version. Since we are making significant changes, having multiple versions of our project is good. If you are ready, I will discuss the foliage section more. This will help us spread out and scatter trees, plants, and any objects you want to scatter. You can use the foliage tool right now. As you can see, we don't have any foliage in our drop foliage here. Let's bring some trees and plants here to start building our project. I downloaded this content, which is called Trees European Beach, from Epic Games Marketplace. The supported engine version is 5.3, and it will be fine since we will use it in a project that is made with a higher version. I already downloaded it so that I can add it to the project. Again, when adding it to the project, I must hit Show All and select my project. Also, you have to select the closest engine version to 5.4, which is 5.3. It may take a little time because it's an 8 GB file, but it went quickly since I already have it on my computer. Let's return to our project. If I go to my content folder now, I see another folder called European Beach. Foliage, geometry, maps, materials, and textures are inside the folders. Let's go to Maps and open this map. Here is a template of what is available inside this package. Simple Wind is on the right side and Pivot Painter Wind is on the left. Some prefer Pivot Painter Wind because it is much more realistic but is not performance friendly. You see all the trees available in this package. Also, you see this small asset called Global Foliage Actor, a control they built to allow you to access many exciting features. I'm going to demonstrate. When it's selected in the detail panel, I can change some of the settings. For example, I can increase wind strength. As you can see, the left side is much more realistic than the right side. However, Pivot Painter Wind is computationally demanding, so be careful. I recommend using Simple Wind instead of Pivot Painter, but if you have a good computer and want to see a more realistic wind, go for Pivot Painter. you also have other controls here. For example, you can change the wind speed. Another exciting part is that you can change the season settings. You can make it more yellowish and autumn-like. With season settings, you can get exciting results. So you have all these items available to you. The most important are wind strength, wind speed, season strength, and season saturation. This demo shows what's available. Now we can head back to the level we were working on. Inside the European Beach folder, you see other folders like materials and textures, which contain all the materials and textures for these trees. You also see a geometry folder. For example, if I go to the simple wind folder, inside the geometry folder, and open one of the static meshes, I see the static mesh of a tree that we can scatter in the scene. Just note that Nanite is activated for this static mesh, so we are getting advantages of Nanite technology here. There is another folder called Foliage. If I open it, I see some settings that control how I want to spread the geometry around the scene. There is a corresponding foliage file for each static mesh in the geometry folder. Whenever we want to scatter a specific mesh in the scene using Foliage Tools, we must first create a foliage actor. The foliage actor contains information about the static mesh and its distribution in the scene, such as the number of instances of that static mesh we are placing. When scattering anything using the Foliage tool, we first need to create a foliage actor for it. Let me explain with an example. When I want to use foliage, I can go to the foliage mode, which is currently empty. I can add foliage by clicking here. Unreal Engine will automatically recognize all foliage actors that I have in my content folder and display them so that I can add and start scattering. But let's look at how we can make foliage actor out of a static mesh. For example, if I go to my geometry folder and pick one of the static meshes for the trees, I can simply drag it to the foliage section of my Foliage Tools. After releasing it here, it will automatically create a foliage actor and ask where you want to place it. But we don't need it in our case, since when we imported our tree pack, it came with a folder with all the foliage actors we needed to scatter the trees around the scene. For this project, I will select all the foliage actors in the 3-pack and drag them to the foliage section. Now that I have all of them here, I can start spreading them around the scene. However, let's move to a corner of our scene first. Before spreading them out, I will examine the options available to us. For demonstration purposes, I will hide the rocks at this point. I'll come to this corner to explore the foliage. If I want to scatter these trees, I must select them by clicking and activating them in the top corner. I can also select multiple items and spread them. Let's examine just spreading one of them in the scene. From the top window, you see that we are in paint mode. I have activated one item. I will see a brush when I come to the scene. If I click and drag, you will see many trees in the scene. I can use the erase option to remove what I have added. As you can see, I can increase the brush size here to paint over a larger area. I can also delete them, if you prefer. Currently, the objects are very dense, so that I will reduce the intensity. When I attempt to paint, there are fewer items in the scene. Using the intensity control, you can change the number of trees placed in the scene with each click. When you place them in the scene, there are many other options. For example, in select mode, you can select them individually to delete, move, or scale them. You can also select all of them together with the Select All option. Another tool is the Lasso tool, which allows you to select multiple items simultaneously and move them around in select mode. Instead of using the brush, you can use the single placement option to place items individually, which is very useful. Please note that if you have more than one item selected to be scattered in the scene, with every click in a single placement option, you place all at once in one place, which doesn't seem optimal in most cases, so there is an option that you can activate here. Change all selected to cycle through selection in single instance mode. In this case, it will cycle through your selected foliage with each placement. You can also select all of them from the top option and then press delete. This will remove them. Let's focus on one of them for now. In paint mode, there are many other options. For example, you can see the geometry associated with the foliage and where it is located. You can also adjust the intensity here. Changing the intensity here allows you to control the intensity for individual items instead of all the selected items. If I increase this to 1000, it will be much denser. However, I usually use the options above the top in the brush setting. Another good feature is the scale option, where you can set minimum and maximum values for the scale. This will make the trees appear in different sizes. As we move down, an option is Align to Normal. If I want to place some trees, they will align with the curvature of the landscape. This is not realistic for trees, but might be suitable for grass. I can uncheck this so that the trees are placed upright. You may notice that sometimes you can't place trees on steep slopes. The ground slope angle setting controls this. By increasing it to nearly 80 degrees, I can set trees on steeper slopes. Another important setting is the Z offset. To demonstrate, I'll set it to -300 and +300. This will place the bottoms of the trees at different heights, which can be helpful in some cases. Let's reset the changes that we made here. Now instead of one, I'm going to select multiple items. Now I can make the changes I want over all selected items. Now that we understand how this works, I will begin with the larger trees and then move on to the smaller ones. Here, we will apply the same principle discussed for the large, medium, and tiny details. Before adding these to the scene, it's a good idea to adjust your settings first and then add the trees. The first row of trees is the largest, and as we go down, they get smaller. These are even smaller trees and bushes. First, I'm going to make some adjustments for all of them. We don't want to align to expect it to be activated, since all of these items are trees and trees usually go up regardless of the surface that is planned on, so we can adjust that. Also, we want to place them on the steepest slopes, so I'm setting the angle to 80 degrees instead of 25. Let's see how big the trees in the first row are. If I place one, it's so large that it's useless for my scene. I'm setting the minimum and maximum scales to 0.3 and 0.5 for the first row to make them more manageable. The smaller trees are a good size, and the smallest ones will be fillers for the scene, so they also seem fine. I will start with the largest and work down to the smallest ones. I'm going to paint trees to cover my scene. It seems reasonable for the first time, but I want to reduce the intensity of adding trees from other sets. I can adjust the brush intensity and size and add more trees, especially behind the main focus area. After the first row, I'll select the smaller trees and add them to the scene. I'm increasing the intensity, especially for the areas behind. It's getting much better. I can increase the density and place some trees. Then come to select mode or lasso mode to delete the ones I don't need. In select mode, I can see and control the placement of the trees. Let's hit Ctrl+Shift+S to save the map. Let's review the sample map we examined when importing our tree pack. We select the global foliage actor from this level, copy it with Ctrl+C, return to our working level, and bring it back here with the Ctrl+V option. Let's place the global foliage actor somewhere back there. When selected, I can adjust the wind speed in the detail section. The movement is unrealistic since we use a simple wind over pivot painter, so I will decrease it. When the foliage actor is selected, I can change the season and make it a little yellow. Remember, it's better to look at it in unlit mode to adjust the color. Now, we have the first round of foliage. However, I'm thinking about adding more foliage to the scene. I'm going to head to Quixel Bridge again. This time, I'm going to select something from the plant section. I've already decided on a few of them and put the link in the description. You don't just need to use plants, you can also scatter rocks using the Foliage tool. So let's add this asset, a collection of small rocks, to the scene. These are 3 items that I want to use. As you can see right now, we don't have Nanite quality plants, so the high quality would be sufficient. Just download it and add it to the project. Let's also add the other one that I downloaded. We have these items and we export them to the scene. When I checked the Megascan asset library, I noticed another folder named 3D plants, which contains the 3D plants inside the engine. Opening the static mesh, I observed that the 3D plants utilize the level of detail LODs system. However, it is slightly different because it includes multiple quality levels, and the final one is simply a surface with a material on top of it known as a billboard. Billboards used to be very useful, especially if you wanted to use them for a game. You should know that we can activate Nanite for these assets right now. Let's activate Nanite for the rest of them as well. After activating Nanite, the LODs system will no longer be used. Like any other object, they have a material and you control them. Nanite has another material just for billboards. Now it's time to add the foliage. Unreal Engine recognized that they were here and added them automatically for us. I'm going to deselect everything and paint my first round. I won't make any changes. I'll start adding this foliage. I'm going to play with the intensity and add it. I can also change the direction of the light to see better. I'll draw the foliage where necessary. I can add foliage to any area visible to the camera, including some inside objects, since they can grow there. I can adjust the intensity to put more foliage in specific areas. You can also change the brush size to draw over areas with deeper slopes. I can pick some grass and add them. I choose areas for smaller grass to scatter around. I can adjust and increase the size, adding more grass to cover some areas. I think we are in good shape. Now that we've finished this, it's time to adjust the color. If I go to unlit mode, you'll see that the latest foliages are too bright. I can find materials and use the color overlay to match them with the rest of the scene. The same goes for the grass. I use the color overlay to make it blend in. Lastly, I want to scatter the stones we brought to our project. If I go to the foliage section, I can drag and drop static meshes for stones. Each time I click, it generates another set of static mesh foliage, and we have to save it somewhere in our content folder. In our case, we can save it in the same folder as static meshes. Now, I can select and paint them like any other foliage actor. Essentially, you can use the Foliage tool to scatter any static mesh. Lastly, I'll adjust the color of the new stones. We have finished here, and I believe we understand Foliage tools well. In the next lesson, I'll discuss decals and how we can use them to add even more detail to our scenes. If we take a look at Quixel Bridge, you'll see that we haven't talked much about decals. Decals are additional details that we can add to our scene. To understand the decals more easily, I can tell you that they are like graffiti. And like graffiti, they are placed as another layer on top of your original material. Although decals can be more than just a graffiti, for example, they can be a series of details that you can add to your material. For instance, by simply placing these decals on a concrete material, you can create these cracks on the concrete. Decals have other uses as well. For example, you can add various leaks to your scene using decals. You can also have some vegetations with the help of decals. It can be said that decals are a very computationally cheap way to add details to your scene. As you can see, decals can even be a door or a thing. For this project, I have already selected some decals that I want to download with high quality. As you can see, it's a graffiti and 2 leaks. Now I will add them. Now, if I go to the content drawer and enter the Megascan folder, there is another folder called Decals. Now, you see that the decal is actually a material instance and its textures. If I open the material, we see some settings that we also had in materials before. So you can change its tiling value or change its color, and the rest of the changes you can make. However, the most important parameter here is opacity, because you can use it to make the decal disappear or reduce its intensity. The rest of the settings are exactly like any other normal material inside Unreal Engine. Let's see how we can add the decals to the scene. I will go to this corner of the scene to fully explain this to you. If you drag the decal into the scene, you'll see that it is easily applied to the scene. For better display, I switched to unlit mode. As you can see, along with the decal, a box has been added which is responsible for controlling the size and its other parameters. So with the help of this box, I can make it smaller. As shown, any part of the scene that this box comes into contact with will display the decal. This way I can adjust it. Also, if you don't want an object to receive a decal, select it and go to its settings. There, type decal and uncheck the receive decals option. Now that object won't receive decals anymore. By rotating it 90 degrees and moving it, I can put it on the wall. Let's add another decal to the scene. For example, you see this leak. I bring it into the scene and put it on the wall. As you can see, we added a leak to the wall. I can change its size to fit the wall. One thing to keep in mind is that you can change the order of the impact of decals on each other. For example, if I select this decal and change the sort order value from 0 to 1, it will be placed on top of the other decal. So you can have multiple decals on top of each other. As I mentioned, a decal works exactly like a material. When I'm in lit mode, I open its material and change its color to red. I can also play with roughness or any other parameter it contains inside, so you see that you should treat a decal like a material. As can be seen, the advantage of having decals is that you can add a lot of details to your scene at no cost. Now that I have one of the decals, I can apply more of them to different parts of my building. Here, the decals act as dirt gathered on top of each other. By increasing and decreasing the opacity, I can increase and decrease its intensity. Using decals to add details is an essential tool in Unreal Engine. Now that we understand how decals work, I want to apply them to my entire project by scaling and moving them. With the help of these decals, I can paint my buildings and add a lot of fidelity and realism to my project. Also, I can change the color of the decals whenever I want. Here, I will move it a bit to get rid of these stretches. Also, I'll continue to place and scale them to help the realism of the project. Now, with the changes I make in the material, I'll improve it further. I have concluded that one decal is enough for this part, so I'll delete the others and resize this one. As you saw, adding the decals quickly added a nice depth to our scene. Make sure to test different decals, and by changing their settings, especially the opacity, see which one works best for your work. I add a few more decals here to increase the depth and age of the scene. I'll bring in some new decals on this board to make it look less clean and to have more depth. These areas are also very clean, so I get help from the decals. Now, by pressing the G button, I go to the game mode to see the scene better. Now it's time to add some randomization to some of the materials on scene. I'll duplicate the material I want and reduce its brightness, then apply it to some parts of the board so that some of its parts are darker. This way, we break the repetition. I do the same for the columns. That is, I copy the material, make it darker, and randomly select some columns and assign the new material to them. Seems like this decal also needs some changes. I will slightly change the lighting using the shortcut Ctrl+L to have a better view. I go to the outliner, and by selecting all the decals, I move them to a new folder and name the folder Decals. It looks like the outliner needs more cleaning up, so I'll move these items to a folder called Props, and these ones to a folder called Landscape. Well, I think we're almost done with this part. As you remember, we had some characters as helpers, and by going into game mode, I can move around in the scene and play. I will talk more about layers in the next lesson. Before I talk more about lighting, I want to discuss another technique for organizing in Unreal, namely layers. You know that we have currently built everything inside different levels, but what if we want to organize them separately within our levels? From the Windows tab, I open the Layer section. As you can see, I currently have no layers, so I right-click and select Create Empty Layer. I name it Buildings. I create two more layers named Landscape and Props. Now I go to the outliner and select all the items related to the landscape, which means the folders for Landscape and Lake. Then I right-click and use the Select and select all Descendants sections to select the contents inside them. Now I go to the Layer section, right-click on the Landscape layer and select Add Selected Actors to Selected Layers. I forgot the rocks, so by selecting all the rocks, I add them to the Landscape layer as well. You can see that by turning the Landscape layer on and off, all the objects turn on and off. Using the same method, I select all the props from the outliner and move them from the Layers panel to the Props layer. Now, to select the rest of the items that are related to the building, I go to the top view, and by select all the objects, I move them to the Buildings layer. As you can see, my lights also went to the Buildings layer. If I want to remove the lights from the layer, I can select my lights from the outliner and right-click on the Buildings layer and select Remove Selected Actors from Layer. You can see that it worked. You saw that this is a great method for organizing items in Unreal Engine 5. Remember that this method is not related to levels. That is, several objects can be in different levels, but still be in one layer. In the next lesson, I will talk about lighting. Well, before continuing the tutorial, I'll press Ctrl+Shift+S to save everything, and again I'll make a separate save in my current level. Let's talk about lighting. Remember that right now I only have day lighting. Okay, let me go to the outliner and delete all my lighting items in the lighting folder so I can start my lighting from the beginning. The first and easiest way to use lighting in Unreal is to use the Environment Light Mixer tool. By clicking on any of these items, a corresponding light actor is created in the scene. As simple as that, I select them and drop them into the lighting layer. So far we've created a very simple lighting, but let me teach you a very important topic before we continue. Another important item that sometimes takes precedence before lighting is the post-process volume. So, from the Add to Project section, I go to the Visual Effects section and create the post-process volume. As soon as you create this item, you'll notice that it has a box around it. Let me go to the Detail section of this item. For example, I completely lower one of the settings, such as color grading, global, saturation. You don't see any changes, right? You need to move inside this box to see the change. Well, now, for the post-process volume to affect my entire environment, when post-process volume is selected, in the Details section, I search for the word Unbound and activate the Infinite Extend option. You can see that it is now fixed. Now I can place it anywhere because its location does not affect its effect. Let me reset what we did for the colors. The first thing we need to do inside the post-process volume is to turn off automatic exposure. This is one of the top priorities for any lighting. As you know, Unreal is a game engine, so it is set up in such a way that if the player goes to dark areas, they light up, and if they go to bright areas, they darken. And this is the same automatic exposure that doesn't work for us, and that's why I search for exposure and set the metering mode value to manual. You can see that immediately everywhere became dark, because now, using the exposure compensation option, we need to manually adjust the brightness. Usually a value of 10.44 is a good starting point. Now I can go to the outliner and move the post-process volume to the lighting folder. Now it's time to explain all these items. That's why I will turn them all off and turn them on one by one to explain them. Let's start with the directional light, so I'll turn it on. This is our sun. It can even be the moon. This is our main light source. You can change its direction by holding Ctrl+L and dragging on the screen. Now let's take a look at some of its settings. When it's selected, I go to the Details section. Note that if you want to use lumen for lighting, the mobility must be set to movable. Here we have intensity, which increases and decreases the intensity of the light when adjusted. You can also change the color of the light. Another important option is the source angle, that is the size of our light source, which is the sun here. As I increase the size of the sun, look at the shadows. You can see that the shadows become softer. And the opposite also works. That is, the smaller the size gets, the sharper the shadows will be. Now if I go to the outliner and turn on sky atmosphere, you can see that by changing the direction of the light, I can see the light source, namely the sun. Now by adjusting the source angle, you can see the size change. I'll turn off sky atmosphere again and go to the light settings. The next important option is the indirect light intensity, which determines the intensity of the bounced light. To see its effect, I'll set a high number like 30. Look at the shadows, they have become brighter. Now let me give a brief explanation about the sky atmosphere. This item simulates our sky and has settings that are beyond the scope of this tutorial. The next item, which is also very important, is the skylight. Look at the shadows before and after activating this item. As soon as this item is turned on, you can see that the shadows become brighter. In general, the skylight captures its entire surrounding environment and projects it as secondary light onto objects. If I go to its settings, one of the most important options is the real-time capture option, which assures us that capturing happens in real time, and by changing the location of the sun, the secondary ambient light is recalculated and captured. If I disable it, I can use other sources for secondary lighting, but we won't delve into that topic right now. Other important options are the sky distance threshold and cube map resolution, which you can test. However, more important than these is the intensity scale option. You can see that increasing it has a good and important effect on making the shadows brighter. You can also change the color of the light within the shadows. Let's move on to the next item, which is volumetric clouds, and turn it on. As you can see, this item creates our clouds, and these two options are its most important settings that adjust the height of the clouds from the ground and the height of the clouds themselves. Let's talk about the last item, which is exponential height fog. You see that when I turn it on, it adds a haze to my environment. Let's go to its settings. This option specifies the intensity of the fog. If I set this color to white, you can better understand the impact of the intensity option. Personally, I usually set the fog color to white, and by adjusting the intensity option, I try to achieve a good balance. The next important option is start distance. With the help of this option, we can change where we want the fog to start. The last option I can mention is fog height falloff, which allows us to change the height of the fog. In general, with these items and their options, we can achieve various lighting effects. The first lighting I want to do is a sunny day. So, by adjusting these two options, I will reduce the fog a bit. Since I want darker shadows, I'll go to Skylight and set the intensity scale to 2. I also want to change the direction of the light, so I'll do that with Ctrl+L and moving the mouse on the scene. Now, I go to directional light to ensure everything is correct. Alright, now let's do another lighting. Remember that we created some sub-levels for lighting like night light. I create another level for sunset and another one for cloudy mode. Now I select them and save them with Ctrl+S. Now I add these three, night light, sunset and cloudy, to the level section. Don't forget to right-click on all of them, and from the Change Streaming Mode section, activate the Always Loaded option. I have already explained the daylight model. Now let's move on to sunset, so I will turn off all of them except for sunset and activate it. Again, from the Environment Light Mixer window, I add all my light items to this level. Similarly, in the Add to Project section, I search for Post Value and put the post-process volume on the page. You can see that in my outliner, I have a series of new lighting items, so I move them to the lighting folder. According to what I said, the first thing we need to do is to go to the post-process, and by searching for exposure, set it to manual. Don't forget to search for unbound and tick the infinite option. Now we can adjust the exposure. Now I adjust the light direction to create an appealing sunset scene. I also go to the directional light settings and make the light color a bit red. Next, I go to the skylight settings and increase the intensity scale a little to lessen the shadow intensity. Now I go to exponential height fog and give it a red tint and play around with its settings. Well, this is our sunset example. Now let's do the night lighting. I go to my levels, turn off sunset, and turn on and activate night light. Now again, with the help of the Environment Light Mixer, I bring the lights into the scene. We also need a post process, which I create. In its settings, I set it to infinite and adjust its exposure. Now, in order for the light to change to night mode, I will lower the light direction but allow some light to remain in the scene. I select directional light and go to its settings to darken the light color. Well, now everything is dark. Using the shortcut Alt+3, I switch to unlit mode to see the scene. For night lighting, I created some light sources using Quixel Mixer and placed them in the environment. Before continuing, I move my light items to the lighting folder. Now, to illuminate the environment, we need to add some lights for our light sources on our building. So, from the Add to Project section, I go to the Lights section and bring a point light into the scene. Now, using the shortcut Alt+4, I switch to the lit mode. Note that from now on, to switch between these modes, I will use these shortcuts, Alt+3 for unlit and Alt+4 for lit. I adjust the position of the light and go to its settings. Then, I make its color slightly yellow and by increasing the source radius, soften its shadow. I set the mobility value to movable and decrease attenuation radius so it doesn't illuminate too much of the environment. Finally, I start copying it for my other light sources. I try not to have light everywhere because this is a ruin here, and now I'm lighting this place mainly for the purpose of this tutorial. So far, we've reached lighting, which still needs a lot of work. First, I move my lights to the lighting folder and create a folder for them as well. Now I need to create some fill lights to complete the ambient light. So, from the Add to Project section and Lights, I create a rect light. I rotate it towards the building and go to its settings, increase its height and width size, increase its intensity, and move it around. And also change its color to yellow. I make a copy of it for the other building and adjust it. Make its color slightly blue to resemble the reflection of light from the lake. Make both of them movable and play around with their settings to achieve my goal. I take a copy for the right side of the building and adjust it. You can see that the intensity of the lights is a bit too high. That's why I reduce the intensities one by one. Now it's time for some lights to shine towards the trees to create a more enticing scene. Again, with the help of rect lights and copying them, I illuminate the trees. During this process, occasionally switch to your camera to ensure that you're placing the lights correctly. Well, that's it for night lighting. Finally, I move the lights to their own folder. In the next lesson, which is the last lesson, we will talk more about sequences and camera movement. Welcome to the last part of this tutorial series. In this lesson, we are going to discuss how to create a sequence, animate the camera, and export single frames and videos. So let's get started. First of all, let's see how we can capture a high-quality single frame from our current view. To do this, we go to this section and click on High Resolution Screenshot. With this number, you can increase the resolution of your final image. For example, I set it to 2 and press Capture. You can see that the address of the storage location appears here, and by clicking on it, you can access your image file. Now let's see how to create a sequence. To do this, first, inside the content folder, I create a folder named Shots. This folder will be where we store our sequences. I right-click inside this folder, and from the Cinematic section, I select Level Sequence. I name it LS for Level Sequence, underscore abandon underscore VO1, meaning version 1. Then open it up. This is the sequencer window. Here is the timeline. This section contains the tools, and here is where items like cameras and characters and etc. are placed. To bring an object into the timeline, there are two methods to do so. The first method is to drag an object from the outliner into the sequence. For example, I can drag the camera we created earlier into the sequence. The second method is to do it directly within the sequence itself. For instance, to create a camera, you can use this section. I select the camera and go to its settings to explain a bit about them. I generally set the film back to DSLR. I move the camera a little. From the focus settings section, by activating the Draw Debug Focus Plane option and changing the manual focus distance number, you can change the focus point of the camera. The focal length value is also one of the important options for the camera. Usually, if you use a high focal length, you will have a greater depth of field value. Okay, now to animate the camera, I use the Transform section. I'll open it so you can see the inside. From here, you can create a frame. Now I move along the timeline to the last frame and move the camera a bit in the direction I want. Then I create another frame. Now, by pressing space, you can see that we have created a camera movement. In order for our movement to have a constant speed, we can choose all the frames, right-click on them, and choose the linear value. Now, if you want to shorten the duration of this movement, you can use these handles. Now I want to place another camera in the middle of the timeline and create another movement, so I will create another camera. I also set my second camera to DSLR and adjust its position. Then, in the second camera, I go to the transform section and frame it according to what I said. Finally, I set the frames to linear mode. Now, if I play it, you will see that the camera does not switch. Our final criterion is what is seen in the camera cuts. To go to it, we click on the camera that is in front of it. The first camera is active on it. Now we have to set at what point the second camera should be activated. Therefore, I go to the middle of the animation and click on the plus sign next to camera cuts and select the second camera. Now, if I play it, you will see the camera switching. You can also change the frame rate from this section. For example, I usually use 24 frames per second. Now, assuming your animation is complete and ready for output, I will teach you how to render it. To do so, use the movie Render Queue. You can see that our sequence has been added to this window. I click on the Settings section. In the Output section, you can change the output location, change the image size, and you can also change the frame rate. These are the most important settings in this section. Finally, I click on Accept, and to render, I click on Render Local. Ultimately, you can finalize the rendered sequence in any editing software you are familiar with. In this example, I'll show you how to import an exported image sequence into Premiere. First, right-click in the project panel and select Import. Navigate to your render directory, select the first frame of your sequence, and make sure to check the image sequence option. Then click Open. Now you'll see all the images imported as a single file. You can right-click on this file and choose New Sequence from Clip to create a new sequence. From here, you can continue editing, color correcting, or whatever you need to do. Thank you for being with me throughout this course. I hope I have taught you something useful. Don't miss our other courses. Goodbye.